Deep underneath Gaza lies a labyrinthine network of tunnels that Hamas has spent the better part of 2 decades building. That network, known in some circles as the Gaza Metro, has been used to smuggle weapons and people, as well as provide Hamas with the ability to navigate Gaza secretly. Now they're being turned against Israel. Following Hamas's October 2023 attack on Israel, the two have been at war, with Israel working to secure Gaza and get rid of Hamas. The Gaza Metro has played a key role for both sides. To Hamas, that network of tunnels allows their fighters to move below ground, out of sight of Israeli troops, as well as presents them with opportunities to set up ambushes that Israel could never see coming. To Israel, the tunnels represent one thing: a major threat. Mapping and countering that network is key to Israel's strategy in Gaza. Better yet, cutting Hamas off from the network entirely would force its fighters into the open, where Israel has a better chance of overwhelming them with conventional arms. Enter Israel's newest weapon, the sponge bomb. Despite its strange-sounding name, the sponge bomb is Israel's latest and most novel weapon in its war against Hamas. And in this video, we're going to explore what that weapon is, how it works, and the reason why Israel needs it if it's to have any chance of taking Gaza from Hamas. So we start with the obvious question: what is the sponge bomb? A sponge bomb is a chemical weapon, though not in the conventional sense in terms of how chemicals have traditionally been used in warfare. It's also not technically a bomb, at least when it comes to exploding upon deployment of impact. The idea may sound crazy, but the science behind how it works is fairly simple. A sponge bomb consists of a plastic container into which 2 chemicals are placed. Those chemicals are separated via a metal barrier. Once removed, the 2 chemicals mix together and start to foam. The foam expands rapidly to fill whatever gap it's in, creating a barrier in the process. In practice, the bomb sounds similar to construction foams, which are used to fill gaps in walls and ceilings. With construction foam, the foam is sprayed onto a gap where it expands slightly before it's solidified following the application of water. The foam can also be used as a bonding agent, proving especially useful for adhering insulative panels to one another, and is extremely quick to cure once water is applied. In terms of warfare, an Israeli soldier can toss the bomb at their intended target. Then, poof! Soldiers can deploy the bomb into a Hamas tunnel, where it expands rapidly to create a powerful foam that hardens in minutes. Once it's finished its expansion, the foam solidifies to barricade the gap into which the bomb is deployed, effectively preventing anybody from navigating through that particular tunnel. Beyond that, little is known about the devices. According to the War Zone, or TWZ, the first reports of the sponge bomb, published in the British newspaper The Telegraph, failed to cite any sources that could explain much about it beyond the basics of how it works. We don't know what chemicals are used in the bomb, only that it's small and light enough to be placed on a target or thrown like a grenade. However, TWZ also mentions that although reports of the sponge bomb actually in use on the ground are thin, the concept behind it isn't so fanciful. It cites the previously mentioned urethane-based construction foams, quoting US Composites Inc. when it explains that a 16-pound density foam is essentially as hard as a rock, and would require a hammer to make any sort of dent in the material once it's expanded. If Israel's sponge bomb works in the same way, Israel essentially has a near-instant wall-building tool for blocking the tunnels in Gaza. However, those walls wouldn't be impenetrable. But for the purposes of quickly navigating through the tunnels or sealing them to prevent ambushes during ground-based operations, they could serve to lend valuable time to Israeli troops. TWZ also reports that this isn't the first time that a country has considered using foam in a militaristic capacity. In the 1990s, it states the US Marine Corps was issued a device capable of spraying a sticky foam at an enemy. Designed as a non-lethal tool, the foam would expand around the targeted individual, solidifying around them to effectively immobilize the enemy. It's believed that weapon was deployed during Operation Restore Hope, when the United States approved the sending of its troops into Somalia to help with famine relief in the embattled nation, though reports of actual use aren't clear. The US only spent around 10 months in the country, withdrawing in March 1994 after Somali fighters shot down a pair of Black Hawk helicopters, killing 18 American soldiers in the process. TWZ said it's not known if the US Marines still has its novelty sticky foam weapon in its inventory. And that wouldn't be the first time that the US military experimented with foam. A contract for a similar weapon that the US Marines purportedly used was awarded to a contractor by the US Army. The idea was similar: create a weapon that could quickly deploy a sticky and hardening foam for use in crowd dispersal. But as with the Marines tool, information beyond that is thin on the ground, with TWZ only able to point to a company named Adherent Technologies as being capable of producing a foam that could stop vehicles in their tracks at the time. More concrete evidence is the use of immobilizing foams in the tractor-trailer trucks that the National Nuclear Security Administration uses when carting sensitive cargo, including nuclear weapons, around the United States. In these trucks, the foam is essentially used as a booby trap that sprays whenever an intruder enters the vehicle. Again, the purpose is similar to the other uses of the foam that TWZ reports, immobilizing the intruder with foam to prevent them from getting their hands on something valuable. In theory, Israel's sponge bombs could work in the same way, only instead of hardening around a person, the foam they deploy expands rapidly and hardens quickly enough to seal entire entranceways. However, the technology doesn't come without risks, which is why it's supposedly been heavily tested. According to YO News, Israeli soldiers were first seen deploying sponge bombs in 2021 during training exercises. Those exercises were ramped up in the wake of the October Hamas attack, with YO suggesting that Israel has been using the bombs at its Ze'alim training facility. Ze'alim is home to what the Jerusalem Post calls a simulated maze of a multi-story Arab urban environment. Built in 2005 following the Second Intifada, an uprising of Palestinian citizens against Israel, the mock town cost $45 million to build and features 600 structures designed to emulate the typical conditions the IDF expects to encounter during urban battles in Gaza. Beyond the houses, shacks, stores, and schools, the facility aims to emulate Palestinian life in other ways. Jeeps drive up and down its streets, with minarets installed to blare the muezzin's call that signals when it's time for the town's residents to pray. But perhaps the most important simulation in the mock town is a small tunnel network, in which the IDF not only practices tunnel-based warfare, but has also been testing its sponge bombs. Again, information on the success or failure of those tests is limited. However, YO News reports that the sponge bombs may come with risks that could counteract their effectiveness in the field. One of those risks relates to the materials used in the bombs. Though there's no concrete information about those materials, the chemicals used are believed to be forms of volatile liquid emulsion. That's dangerous in its own right. TWZ, via the Telegraph's initial report, says that some Israeli soldiers have already suffered consequences as a result of mishandling those materials. Thankfully, none appear to have accidentally encased themselves in the solidifying stone. However, the chemicals used are supposedly dangerous enough to have caused several soldiers to lose their sight due to the mishandling. Again, those reports are unverified. However, they've led to speculation that Israel might use novel means to deploy its sponge bombs. These might include specially designed throwbots, which are small robots that deliver visuals of their surroundings to an operator, who would then be able to choose when to deploy the sponge bomb the throwbot carries. Other potential solutions include micro-drones, which the IDF could use to map out the Gaza tunnel systems ahead of time to decide where best to deploy sponge bombs, cutting down on the time they need to carry the bomb. It could even be possible for large drones to deploy the bombs once the micro-drones have mapped the tunnels, eliminating the human element altogether. And beyond the risks the bomb poses to the soldiers deploying them, there's another issue to consider. Many of the tunnels underneath Gaza stretch under civilian buildings, with several having exit and access points inside those buildings. That could present a moral problem for the IDF. Imagine that the IDF has used its sponge bombs to seal a key entrance to these tunnels in an area it intends to strike. That area is heavily populated by civilians, who now have no means of escape. Or perhaps worse yet, the tunnels could be sealed while the civilians are still inside, leaving them to slowly starve if they're not fortunate enough to have the tools capable of breaking through a solidified foam that may be as strong and thick as a solid stone wall. Perhaps it's these risks and moral issues that have led to so few reports of sponge bombs actually being used in the field. Either Israel is being extremely secretive, with only unconfirmed reports of the bomb's existence being reported, or it's decided not to deploy them, either because of the risk they pose to civilians or its own soldiers. Still, those risks might be outweighed by the risks the IDF and even Gaza's citizens face if the tunnels are left intact. To understand why, it's worth exploring a little of the history of Hamas's tunnel network. In July 2014, National Public Radio, or NPR, released an interesting report on the then fighting that had broken out in the Gaza Strip. In that report, NPR spoke to a Palestinian man named Karim, who explained that the fighting had led to a secret entrance to a Hamas tunnel being unveiled. "There is a chicken coop near us," claims Karim, emphasizing that he knew it was a chicken coop because he'd seen chickens being reared there. However, that coop was revealed to be much more than it appeared following an Israeli strike that destroyed it. Underneath lay the entrance to a tunnel that led east toward Israel. "We didn't know about it, but we faced a risk because of it," Karim said. And those words were proven to be true, as the Shujaiya neighborhood in which Karim lived and the chicken coop was located was among the first that Israel shelled when it began a ground invasion into the Gaza Strip in 2014. The result? Thousands of Gazans had to flee their homes to avoid dying due to a secret tunnel that most had no idea even existed. While reports like these represented the first that many outside of military circles had heard about the tunnel network underneath Gaza, NPR says that the Israeli military had known about the tunnels long before the Gaza-Israel conflict of 2014. It reports that even the concept of building tunnels under Gaza has existed for millennia. Referencing Gaza, A History, Jean-Pierre Filiu's book on the region, NPR says that the first historic references to the subsoil of Gaza were made when Alexander the Great laid siege to the region in 332 BC. Those tunnels were the reason Alexander didn't enjoy the quick victory he expected when invading the region. Filiu says that the siege of Gaza involved 100 days of fruitless attacks and tunneling before it finally fell. Alexander was so infuriated by the trouble those tunnels had caused him that he went on a rampage throughout the region. Fast forward to more recent times, and the modern versions of these very ancient defensive measures have been used for more than simply hiding fighters and storing supplies. NPR reports that Palestinians have used the tunnel to overcome Israeli restrictions on traveling, as well as importing and exporting goods. Many of the tunnels have been dug to the south heading into Egypt, essentially making them vital to propping up Gaza's economy. The tunnels are large enough for items like cars and cows to be transported through them, making the tunnels key to a massive smuggling operation that's been going on for decades. Then, Hamas took over Palestine in 2006. The tunnels were still used for smuggling, though the items being sent through them were subjected to attacks used to strengthen the insurgent group. And much like those who fought against Alexander the Great so many centuries before, Hamas quickly realized the tactical potential those tunnels held. They've since used them to set up ambushes, store supplies, and create routes to many of the hundreds of rocket launching positions they've set up inside Gaza. They've also been used to smuggle people. In 2006, Hamas used one of its tunnels to enter Israel and kidnap an Israeli soldier named Gilad Shalit. What followed were 5 years of negotiations, with Shalit being held as a prisoner the entire time, that resulted in Israel capitulating and agreeing to the release of 1,000 Palestinian prisoners in exchange for that single soldier. The IDF was left with egg on its face. However, it's also gained a renewed appreciation for the importance of the Gaza Metro to Hamas and how this complex network of tunnels could place them at a disadvantage militaristically. The challenge Israel now faces is that it still doesn't know enough about the tunnels. Where are they? Where do they go? Just how many tunnels exist for them to have to find, clear out, and secure? Reports on all of those questions vary, with the Wilson Center saying it's likely that the full network is at least 300 miles, encompassing much of Gaza. The tunnels are strong, reinforced with concrete, and equipped with electricity that not only lights them up, but enables the use of communications equipment while underground. And according to some Israeli military experts, some of the tunnels descend 200 feet, a serious problem for the IDF when it comes to committing resources to secure them. Hamas has also gone to great lengths to ensure it has secure access to its ancient tunnel network. Beyond the concrete used in the tunnels themselves, Reuters reports that the entrances are typically long vertical shafts that are around 3.2 feet wide and contain climbing bars. Each shaft features supporting walls made using brick or concrete and will stretch as far down as it needs to before it reaches a tunnel that connects to a vast horizontal network that's around half the size of New York's subway. Hamas has also built defensive measures into the tunnels. Many feature reinforced doors that block access to entire sections. It wouldn't be too much of a stretch to suggest that the tunnel network under Gaza is essentially an underground city. A city that could host hundreds, perhaps even thousands of Hamas fighters at any one time. That's the sheer scale of the problem that Israel faces when trying to fight against Hamas in Gaza itself. With its sponge bombs, it hopes to at least be able to make the tunnels less useful to Hamas. It could use the bombs to seal entrances and exits to the tunnels, easily filling the 3-foot-wide shafts that Hamas uses to access its labyrinthine network. It could also use its sponge bombs to seal up fighters inside those tunnels once the IDF has penetrated. Imagine an attack on a portion of the network that sees soldiers descend into connected tunnels from either side, seal them up to block them from being used, and then further seal the entrances to prevent Hamas from getting inside to fix the issue. That's what Israel may have in mind when it comes to its sponge bombs. However, those bombs are far from the only weapons the country has in its arsenal when it comes to dealing with the Gaza Metro. Some of its weapons are diplomatic. Take Egypt as an example. We mentioned earlier that Palestinians often use the tunnels to enter Egypt with illegally smuggled goods, even after Hamas had taken over Gaza. That was allowed to continue for years because of Mohammed Morsi, the former Egyptian leader, and his ties to the Muslim Brotherhood. However, when Abdel Fattah el-Sisi came to power, he eliminated the Muslim Brotherhood's influence, meaning Hamas no longer had an ally in Egypt that was willing to keep the tunnels open. El-Sisi has invested in bulldozing the tunnels into Egypt, weakening a Gazan economy that is already struggling due to Israeli sanctions and Israel's own efforts to demolish the tunnel network. Then there are more conventional military measures the IDF is using to handle the tunnels. Beyond the sponge bombs, which may not have been deployed yet, the IDF will use a host of other techniques to try to map out the tunnels. On the attack side of things, USA Today suggests that snipers will be deployed at known tunnel entrances and exits. Those snipers may be tasked to eliminate any who attempt to use these access points, though that would give away that Israel knows where they are. More likely is that snipers will be deployed to support ground troops on operations near a known access point, allowing them to take out any Hamas fighters who attempt to ambush the ground troops via the tunnels. Who knows, perhaps the snipers could even be used to clear the way for Israeli soldiers to deploy their sponge bombs. Other tactics, according to USA Today, could involve simply throwing improvised explosive devices, or IEDs, down the access points to wreak havoc inside a tunnel. Alternatively, drones equipped with bombs could either drop those bombs down the long shafts used to access the tunnels or navigate down them to explode once inside. Of course, the obvious limitation here is that if Reuters is correct, the access shafts are only 3 feet wide, making it difficult to navigate drones through them. Still, even an explosion caused by a stuck drone in an access shaft could make that shaft useless to Hamas's fighters. There's also the tricky prospect of finding and mapping the tunnels to consider. If Israel is to have any chance of fighting in the tunnels and deploying its sponge bombs, it needs to know where they are. That's tough. Al Jazeera points out that the entrances to the tunnels likely number in the tens of thousands, with most being hidden inside civilian buildings. Satellites can't spot the vast majority of them. However, there are a few techniques the IDF can employ to get an idea of where these entrances are. Drone surveillance is one. Since 2014, Israel has been flying drones around Gaza. Those drones are equipped with clever pieces of software that can analyze recorded footage for movement patterns. If there seems to be a lot of movement toward a particular building that normally wouldn't have so many people visiting it, the IDF can deduce that there's likely a tunnel entrance that's ready for a sponge bombing in that building. These drones can also link to a database the IDF maintains that contains photographs of hundreds of known Hamas fighters. Should a drone find somebody who triggers a match, it can follow that person and perhaps shed light on another tunnel entrance location. It's far from easy work, which perhaps makes it understandable that Israel is considering going all out to get rid of the tunnels altogether. In December 2023, Metro reported on photos of IDF troops who were installing water pumps a mile north of the Al-Shati refugee camp. Fitting 5 pumps in total, the IDF may be planning to use the water those pumps produce to flood the tunnels. According to Metro, the pumps could collectively send thousands of cubic meters of water into Gaza's tunnels every hour. That would offer a fast solution to the tunnel problem. Hamas fighters would have to escape quickly, giving away tunnel entrance locations in the process if they wanted to avoid dying in a watery underground grave. But even that approach has potential problems. Any Israeli hostages being kept in the tunnels would likely die as a result of the flooding, with the constant streams of water also having the potential to damage underground infrastructure in Gaza besides the tunnels. So there's no perfect solution, which brings us back to Israel's sponge bombs. The idea appears to be sound, a fast-expanding foam bomb that essentially creates near-instant walls inside the Hamas tunnels could lend valuable time to IDF forces both on the ground and in the tunnels themselves. But with such a complex network lying underneath Gaza, it's clear the IDF can't rely on sponge bombs alone. It needs to find as many tunnel entrances as it can and map the underground network to figure out where Hamas fighters are likely to spring up. And even if it goes scorched earth with a flooding strategy, it could risk the lives of civilians and Israeli hostages in its effort to gain a tactical advantage. And with that, we turn the questions over to you. What do you think of Israel's sponge bombs? Do they represent a viable tactic for taking on the massive tunnel network underneath Gaza? Or is the idea flawed to the point where the bombs would offer little tactical advantage? Tell us what you think, both about the bombs and Israel's other strategies for taking on the Gaza network, in the comments below. And thank you for watching the video. Now go and check out how Israel's Iron Dome actually works, or click this other video instead. Imagine a scenario where the Middle East's precarious peace shatters in an instant. At the heart of the crisis, a bold Iranian strike against Israel, a direct response to an April assault on Tehran's consular interests in Damascus. The retaliatory move isn't just about regional dynamics, it's about showing strength when pushed to the brink. As missiles arc over the sky, tracing paths of defiance and despair, the first hour of this conflict will set the tone for what would become one of the most consequential confrontations in modern history. Hour 1. Hundreds of missiles and drones will be sent from Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen in a direct military attack on the Jewish state. But of the dozens of cruise missiles launched by Iran and its proxies, most will be intercepted by Israeli fighter jets or shot down by one of Israel's high-tech air defense systems, with only a handful of the 100-plus ballistic missiles that took flight actually falling inside Israel's borders. This initial barrage from Iran, lasting 4 or 5 hours, will cause minimal damage to mostly military targets. At the onset of this attack, the US military will also leap to Israel's defense, shooting down dozens of missiles and drones, primarily utilizing its nearby Navy destroyers like the USS Carney and USS Arleigh Burke, which were both stationed nearby in the eastern Mediterranean Sea. The US Air Force's 494th Fighter Squadron, headquartered in Britain, and its 335th Fighter Squadron out of Seymour Johnson Air Force Base in North Carolina, will also get in on the action, sending 2 squadrons of F-15E Strike Eagles to take down dozens of Iranian attack drones. British Royal Air Force planes will, too, shoot down a number of drones headed for Israel. 5 hours into the war it effectively started, Iran might consider the matter closed, content to have made its point, even though it didn't necessarily inflict much damage. But will Israel take this action as Iran intended? Will they see it as a stern warning to them and their allies? A warning to Jerusalem and the Israel Defense Forces that if they step over the line again, they can expect a considerably more severe response. But what happens if Tehran's attempt at intimidation fails and Israel counters? If this happens, it won't matter that Iran intentionally chose long-range attacks that it knew Israel could easily counter. It won't matter that no US facilities were hit. If Israel does immediately strike back, ignoring the potential fallout of an equal or stronger response, and in spite of the many requests for clemency coming from top US military officials and the Pentagon, we will be that much closer to a full-scale war. The Israelis, however, already stretched thin from the war they've been fighting with Hamas, might not be looking to enter another full-on war with Iran. But as they have in the past, the Israeli leadership will be feeling intense pressure to retaliate. Too strong of a response, though, and these 2 countries, as well as their allies, will almost certainly find themselves at war. Hour 6. After consulting his war cabinet, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is still facing a great deal of domestic pressure after being charged with fraud and corruption back in 2019, might feel he has no choice but to take a hard line against Iran's clear escalation. He might take into consideration that the so-called Axis of Resistance, a network that extends Tehran's influence across the Arab world, which most notably includes Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, Iran has taken plenty of shots at them before. Before now, however, neither Iran nor Israel has overtly attacked the other at home. The hostilities have never risen to the level of face-to-face military confrontation. It seems that the war in Gaza may have tipped the scales. Hour 7. Some members of the Israeli government will be absolutely determined to launch a fierce and immediate counterstrike, even though President Joe Biden has made it perfectly clear that the United States military won't be a part of any offensive operations. So to strike a balance, to not upset its Western friends, while feeling compelled to respond, Israel will first strike at Iran's air defense systems, perhaps their most advanced systems, like the ones located at the Iranian airbase in Isfahan, in central Iran, that are responsible for protecting the Natanz nuclear facility. For this attack, instead of making a bolder statement and sending fighter jets into Iranian airspace, Israel will deploy a small squadron of quadcopters to confuse Iran's air defenses, then launch a pair of missiles from Syrian airspace several hundred kilometers to the west. Jumping ahead to hour 10, this is when we truly find ourselves at the flashpoint of this war. For if Israel doesn't immediately follow up this tempered strike with another, more forceful attack, it will effectively put the ball back in Iran's court. Maybe this was enough and Iran is already planning another strike, or perhaps Tehran is suspicious of Israel's modest retaliation, believing it to be just the beginning of a larger operation. If either of these is true, Iran will go back on the offensive, launching more of its own strikes, acting before any of its missiles or aircraft can be destroyed on the ground, before the sky above Natanz can fill with Israeli jets. Hour 12. Iran and its proxies launch another swarm of drones and hundreds more ballistic and cruise missiles, increasing the size of its previous attack, which was already one of the largest barrages of this kind in military history. Once the air assault ends, we might also see Iran directing its proxy forces, most likely Hezbollah militants, to attack Israel's ground borders from Syria or Lebanon. In terms of manpower, Iran does have a substantial advantage, with approximately 1.2 million active and reserve military personnel and thousands of artillery systems, while Israel only has around 750,000 combined troops, many of whom are actively engaged in operations in Gaza, as well as maintaining a defensive posture in the north to counter the ongoing threat from Hezbollah. Israel does, however, have a much more formidable armored division that includes over 2,200 tanks, nearly twice as many as Iran is believed to have. Either way, though, the nations are still separated by several countries – Syria, Iraq, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. From border to border, that's a distance of nearly 1,000 kilometers, which makes a land-based conflict between national armies highly improbable. Not to mention that any attempt by Iran to deploy troops through Iraq and Syria would almost certainly provoke an immediate and devastating response from US forces positioned in the region. But that doesn't completely take an organized ground attack by Hezbollah off the table. In addition to an array of small arms, machine guns, and hundreds of thousands of rockets at its disposal, Hezbollah boasts a range of anti-tank and anti-air systems, thousands of drones, and dozens of tanks and other armored vehicles. The group has also already engaged in skirmishes with Israel along its northern border, as both sides have exchanged intermittent missile and drone strikes. Hour 17. Given a clear directive from Tehran, Hezbollah's leaders would likely move to step up their offensive operations in the north, isolating their attacks on the Galilee Panhandle, a finger of Israeli territory that juts into southern Lebanon, as they attempt to force IDF troops out once and for all. Mostly abandoned and overtaken by nature, the Finger of Galilee is a virtual no man's land. Even families who have lived in the area for generations have had to flee. When it comes to this sort of ground-level urban combat, Israel's advanced air defense systems aren't much help. They are great at intercepting rockets that fly in high arcs and are difficult to aim, but in areas like Galilee, Hezbollah fighters often use rocket-propelled grenades and anti-tank missiles, which allow for more precise line-of-sight targeting and fly low to the ground. At the outset of a full-scale war, if Hezbollah was able to fully occupy the Galilee Panhandle, it would give their forces, as well as other Iranian proxies, a direct route from Lebanon into northern Israel. But given the lack of progress they've made so far, this is unlikely. A naval element to this war would also be unlikely. Despite Iran's recent aggressions in and around the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf of Oman, including the seizure of the MCS Ares, a Portuguese-registered merchant vessel Tehran claimed to be linked to Israel. In preparation for war with Israel, Iran would likely use navy assets to escort its commercial vessels to safety in the Red Sea, where its Yemeni proxies, the Houthis, have been creating havoc since 2018. This means that the primary battles of the war will continue to be fought in the air, with both sides utilizing its arsenal of missiles, jets, and drones. Hour 25. Israel gets ready to deploy one or all of its long-range assets, F-35 stealth fighter bombers and precision deep-strike intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs. But even if Israel has better planes and a handful of nuclear-equipped submarines, Iran has the largest and most diverse ballistic missile arsenal in the Middle East. Israel might have more capable ballistic missiles, but they've got fewer of them and less of a variety. Most of Iran's missiles were acquired from foreign allies, primarily North Korea, and Iran is still dependent on foreign suppliers for many key components and equipment, but it does have the technical and industrial capacity to develop long-range missiles, including ICBMs. In fact, the Islamic Republic is the only country to have developed a missile with a 2,000-kilometer range without having nuclear weapons first. Hour 26. Hezbollah fighters attempt to push over the border in the north, and Iran continues to send waves of missiles and drones toward key Israeli military targets. Non-nuclear ICBMs take flight in both directions, crossing paths in the sky high above Jordan and Iraq on their way to Tehran and Jerusalem. At this point, this long-simmering conflict that was previously limited to secret assassinations, cyber attacks, nuclear sabotage, and isolated war-by-proxy land, sea, and air attacks will explode into a multinational conflict that directly and indirectly involves at least two nuclear power states. It's unlikely, but not impossible, that after the first round of ICBMs are exchanged, Israel will escalate to a nuclear response. Hypothetically, if they sent a cruise missile with a 150-kiloton nuclear warhead into the heart of Tehran, the blast would kill nearly 500,000 people, vaporizing everything within 1.35 square kilometers of the point of impact. Hour 30. If Israel does use a nuclear weapon against Iran, it will leave the world in a state of shock. Iran, that we know of, has no equivalent response. For Tehran has repeatedly denied having a nuclear weapons program, even if Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei has also said that if they wanted to have one, their enemies wouldn't be able to stop them. If this is true, and Iran is unable to retaliate with nukes, either on its own or via one of its allies, the war between Iran and Israel effectively comes to an end. But the diplomatic consequences that Israel will face for this are nearly incomprehensible. Previously, the primary concern among the Israeli leadership has been that a nuclear-armed Iran would only be emboldened, increasing its support for its proxies, if not directly providing them with nuclear weapons to use against the Jewish state. After all, if Israel's nuclear arsenal hasn't been enough to deter Iran from launching a conventional strike, then what might happen once Iran is bringing nukes of its own to the proverbial bargaining table? Recently, an advisor to Iran's supreme leader said they'd have no choice but to build a nuclear bomb if Iran's existence were to be threatened. But let's rewind a bit. Long before the nuclear option hits the table, but as soon as Iran's first missiles take flight, what we're likely going to see is squadrons of Israeli fighters screaming towards Iran, targeting various air defense systems and missile launch facilities all across the country. The Israelis will be flying the very best US-manufactured combat aircraft that were specifically designed according to IAF requirements, meaning that the Israeli Air Force will certainly have the upper hand. Iran's Air Force employs approximately 37,000 personnel. However, years of international sanctions have significantly restricted its access to modern military technology. It has only a few dozen operational strike aircraft, Russian jets and aging US models acquired before the Iranian Revolution of 1979. The most capable of which is probably its Sukhoi 24s, a supersonic all-weather tactical bomber developed in the Soviet Union. The Russians have apparently tweaked some of theirs to carry tactical nuclear weapons, but the Su-24 was first developed in the late 1960s, a sign of the relative weakness of Iran's air force. One thing Iran does seem to have an abundance of, however, is drones. Tehran has provided more than 1,000 Shahed-136 UAVs, as well as Shahed-131 and Mohyah-6 UAVs to support Russia's invasion of Ukraine, so we can only assume they have thousands more to spare. Israel, on the other hand, has hundreds of F-15, F-16, and F-35 multi-purpose jet fighters, including stealthy variants like the F-35I Adir and less stealthy variants like the F-15I Ram. The Israeli Air Force does lack long-range bombers, though they might not need them in this war, though they do have a small fleet of repurposed Boeing 707s that serve as fueling tankers, which would allow its fighters to reach Iran and carry out multiple waves of precision sorties. Israel has also become a pioneer in drone technology. Among other assets, Israel Aerospace Industries has produced the IAI Heron pilotless plane that can travel 10.5 kilometers over 52 hours of continuous flight. But it's in terms of their air defense capabilities that Israel has an even larger advantage. Developed after the Gulf War with billions of dollars worth of help from the United States, Israel's multi-layer aerial defense system, along with its array of top-of-the-line fighter aircraft, gives them several additional options for shooting down long-range Iranian drones and missiles. The Arrow 3, which can intercept ballistic missiles above the Earth's atmosphere, is their highest altitude system, while an earlier model, Arrow 2, works at lower altitudes. Their mid-range system, known as David's Sling, is best suited to counter ballistic missiles and cruise missiles, while their so-called Iron Dome takes care of any short-range threats, like rockets and mortars, but can also, in theory, take down any of the more powerful missiles that the Arrow systems or David's Sling might miss. After determining that an incoming rocket is a threat, the Iron Dome will fire an interceptor, only if that threat will likely do damage to a populated area or important infrastructure. These systems are also linked to US bases in the region to facilitate an expedited response from coalition partners. This means that a large number of Iran's assets, particularly drones, will be shot down by Allied aircraft long before reaching Israel. It also means that we can expect to see, even during the earliest stages of the war, a notable upswelling of Allied defensive support. With all that said, if cooler heads prevail and Iran and Israel can both refrain from trading ICBMs and potentially nukes, this war will look much different. At around hour 25, instead of every major city in both Israel and Iran being turned to rubble and ash, we could see allies on both sides start to mobilize. After some diplomatic posturing, the US will likely step in, utilizing its full array of strategic offensive assets, cruise missiles, B-52 bombers, sub-launched ballistic missiles, as well as carrier and land-based jet fighters, to launch a sweeping attack against Iran's most valuable military assets. An attack that would likely be closely coordinated with Israel, if not performed jointly. Hour 30. Iran's only state ally in the Middle East is Syria, but the government of President Bashar al-Assad would probably not be too much help, given its ongoing struggle to re-establish control over the country following the outbreak of the civil war in 2011. Tehran has good relations with Moscow, but Putin's war in Ukraine would seriously limit Russia's ability to back them up, especially if the US is already directly involved. Iran is somewhat friendly with China too, which has brought Iranian oil in the past, but Beijing has current and future Western sanctions to worry about. This means that Iran's best hope for outside support is its axis of resistance. If the Iranian leadership were to instruct elements of some or all of these forces to begin a consolidated attack on Israel, the IDF, which is already committed to its war with Hamas, would be stretched very thin as it tried to defend Israel's borders. A coalition of Axis forces would do its best to push in and occupy Israeli territory, but it's hard to say how effective that would be. Hezbollah has been fighting with Israel for almost 20 years, while Iran-backed militias have continued to target US forces in Iraq and Syria, and Yemen's Houthis have continued to launch missiles and drones at Israel and carry out attacks in the Red Sea. But this regional coalition, whose members include the Syrian government, Hamas, and other militant groups from Iraq to Yemen, have only had marginal success, due partially to their differing priorities and unique domestic challenges. In fact, Hamas has already called on the Axis for help battling the IDF in Gaza. The Houthis have been on the losing end of several encounters with the US Navy, and as for Hezbollah, it took Lebanon years to rebuild after its war with Israel in 2006, and now, half a decade into a financial crisis that's driven up poverty and hollowed out the country's governing institutions, the leadership in Beirut aren't eager to enter another full-scale war with Israel and its allies. The US, now that it's found itself bankrolling Ukraine's defense against Russia and having fought two costly wars in Iraq and Afghanistan over the past 2 decades, doesn't want to see the conflict in Gaza spiral out into a war between nations either. But that doesn't mean it won't. If the US, as well as Israel's allies in Europe, truly want to deter regional war in the Middle East, they will need to convince Iran to rein in both its proxies and its nuclear program. Hour 48. As the Israel-dominated US-backed aerial war continues, we're going to see a serious escalation of the cyber war that's already been raging between these two countries. Instead of direct military engagement on the ground, Iran might aim to undermine Israel's military defenses and domestic stability. Since the conflict in Gaza began, cyber attacks against Israel have tripled. So in a war with Iran, Israel would need to brace itself for increased cyber hostility that will likely come in the forms of attacks on its information technology sector intended to disrupt, steal, or leak sensitive information. In the past, cyber attacks have allowed Iran to take regular shots at Israel while minimizing the risk of direct US action. Another way Iran might look to minimize the risk of pulling Israel's allies into the war or avoid a full-scale regional war altogether is by leaning on asymmetrical warfare tactics, like targeted assassinations or attacks on Israeli embassies and consulates in the West. Indirect actions that have allowed Iran's leaders to claim small, retaliatory victories without broadening the conflict beyond their control. If a war between Israel and Iran reaches this point, however, there will be no turning back. So why does Iran seem determined to escalate things now? Perhaps after the Hamas attack on October 7, 2023, Tehran smelled blood in the water, leading them to a false impression that Israel could no longer defend itself alone. But given what's happened so far, that doesn't seem to be the case. And if this war really does happen, Iran might be facing a less patient, more ruthless Israel out to prove itself. In terms of who wins this war though, Iran or Israel, the reality is no one wins when a string of violent conflicts rooted in ideological differences is allowed to slowly escalate into a war between nations. But given Israel's success so far in defending itself against Iran's most credible threat, it's doubtful that Tehran possesses the military might needed to dominate this conflict in the air, on the ground, or at sea. So it's probably in Iran's best interest to consider the matter settled and go back to its previous war-by-proxy strategy. It would be wise, too, for the Iranian leadership to consider the level of strategic accuracy Israel has already displayed during its strike on their air defense systems in Isfahan. This should really tell Iran 2 things. 1, Israel would also like to avoid a full-scale war, and 2, it has the ability to hit whatever target it wants, whenever it wants. As the Israeli leadership decides what to do next, it would probably be wise of them to take a look at their own history. Back in 1991, during the Gulf War, Iraq fired 40 Scud missiles at Israeli civilian targets, killing 2 civilians and injuring several hundred people, in a deliberate attempt to draw Israel into the Gulf War. If then Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir had taken the bait though, it would have fractured the 42-country coalition formed by US President George H.W. Bush that had aligned against Saddam Hussein after he ordered the invasion and occupation of Kuwait. To encourage Israel not to retaliate, the Bush administration sent over a shipment of Patriot missiles. Although not the most effective weapon for intercepting Iraq's Soviet-made Scud missiles, the Patriots did help persuade Shamir to stay out of the US-led war. and in the end the anti-Iraq coalition held and quickly defeated Saddam. Clearly, Shamir understood the value of both international cooperation and restraint. Netanyahu, Israel's current president, was a deputy prime minister at the time and is considered by many to have been Shamir's mentee. Time will tell if he indeed follows in his mentor's footsteps. Since the earliest years of Israel's existence, largely due to numerous wars intended to erase it from the map, the country has maintained a self-defense strategy rooted in the notion that the best defense is a good offense. Formerly known as the Begin Doctrine, this policy was named after Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin, who famously authorized the bombing of Iraq's Osirak nuclear reactor in 1981. As work on the plant neared completion, a plant Israel believed would have the capacity to produce plutonium for warheads, Prime Minister Begin dispatched 8 F-16s to preemptively destroy it. It seems, however, that Netanyahu's government is taking a softer approach when it comes to Iran, who in defiance of Western pressure has pushed on with its nuclear program, claiming but not proving that it does not intend to weaponize the program. Since Iran launched its attack in April, there has been intense speculation as to whether Israel will lean back on its previous nuclear defense strategy or simply hope Tehran won't dare to cross that line. With its attack on Iran's air defense systems that were guarding at least one uranium enrichment site at Natanz, Israel has shown that it could also have hit several major nuclear facilities if it wanted to. But maybe not. Israel has known for years that an attack on Iran's numerous and well-fortified nuclear facilities would be much more difficult than its 1981 campaign in Iraq. Iran is larger and farther away, and taking out its facilities would require a sustained bombing campaign by the Israeli Air Force, which is more accustomed to limited precision strikes. For now at least, it looks as though both sides have taken a step back from the brink of war, but the Middle East is a far more dangerous and precarious place because of these recent events. Both Israel and Iran have crossed a critical red line, both militarily and symbolically, and it's certainly possible that either country could be the one to push this conflict past the point of no return. But what do you think? Have Iran and Israel already reached that point? Are these two countries, as well as their allies, headed for a full-scale war? And if they are, who would win? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Now go and check out if the US and Iran go to war, who wins, hour by hour. Or click this other video instead. Drama unfolded under the Middle Eastern night sky on April 13, 2024, as a new chapter of conflict was written in this volatile region. For the first time, Iran launched Operation True Promise, directly targeting Israel, igniting alarm bells over the prospect of a broader war. As air raid sirens pierced the calm of early hours of April 14th, the tension escalated. Israel, not one to sit quietly under threat, struck back at Iran within days. But what drives this deep-seated animosity? Why would Iran choose such a provocative path against Israel? Let's look at the ideological and geopolitical forces that fuels Iran's relentless assaults and unpack why this conflict shows no signs of easing up. First, the attack itself. Iran launched over 300 drones and missiles. The launch points included territory in Iran, Iraq, Yemen, and Lebanon. It was the largest drone operation in history. According to Iran's state television, the weapons involved included the Shahed 136, which had already become infamous for its role in Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Sources affiliated with Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, said that the Shahed 238 was also involved. This drone is faster than the 136, as it's powered by a turbojet rather than a propeller. The 238's faster flight time better matches the events that took place on the nights between the 13th and 14th. There were 170 drones in total. Iranian sources also mentioned that the Emad ballistic missiles, the Khyber Shekan missiles, and Pave cruise missiles were used in the attack. Iran launched 120 such ballistic missiles and 30 cruise missiles. Iran's proxies, the Lebanese Hezbollah, also participated, claiming that it fired rockets into the Golan Heights, targeting an Israeli barracks. The attack came in two waves. The drones comprised the first phase. Their job was to deplete Israeli air defenses and pave the way for the missiles that would come in the second wave. Israel had help from its allies in the region to fend off the Iranian attack. The United States helped to shoot down many of the Iranian projectiles. Britain's Royal Air Force did as well, with Prime Minister Rishi Sunak claiming that Typhoon fighters based in Cyprus had taken out a number of the drones. According to Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, a spokesman for the Israeli military, France was also patrolling the airspace and likely acted in some capacity, whether through direct action or intelligence support with the radars it had in the area. Jordan also shot down intruders over its airspace. None of the drones or cruise missiles penetrated Israeli territory. Most of the ballistic missiles were also destroyed. The few that made it into Israel did little damage. The most notable one slightly damaged Israel's Nevatim airbase south of the West Bank. The only significant injury was of a 7-year-old girl in the Bedouin community in southern Israel. She suffered a serious head wound when fragments of an intercepted ballistic missile fell on her family's home in the town of Arad. 31 others were treated for minor injuries or anxiety. Iran launched its attack in response to an Israeli airstrike on a building in the diplomatic compound of the former embassy in Damascus, Syria, on April 1st. The building had been used by the IRGC's Quds Force, its intelligence and special operations unit, and the attack killed 11 of its members, including Brigadier General Mohammad Reza Zahedi, who was in charge of its operations in Syria and Lebanon. Despite Iran's promise of retaliation for the Damascus strike, the attack on Israel seemed theatrical. The Israelis had hours to prepare, and the number of drones was far from sufficient to overwhelm Israel's robust air defense network. The spectacle of the weapons flying overhead seemed designed to spread on social media, and only sparsely populated areas were hit by missiles in the end. Afterward, Iran immediately declared Operation True Promise to have concluded as a success. Overall, it resembled Iran's retaliatory strike after the United States targeted killing of Qasem Soleimani in Iraq in January 2020. Iran launched a telegraphed retaliatory attack on American military positions in Iraq shortly afterward. The only casualties were 100 passengers on an Iranian domestic airliner that was accidentally targeted on takeoff during the attack, which caused significant embarrassment for Tehran. Nevertheless, despite similar theatrics, there are important differences between this incident and the 2020 one. Aside from it being much bigger, Israel has retaliated, which the United States did not do. Israel is also Iran's arch-enemy and serves as a formidable obstacle for it to achieve its regional ambitions. Hard as it is to believe now, Iran and Israel had good relations before the former's Islamic Revolution in 1979. It recognized Israel in 1950, long before most other states in the region. There was a great amount of dissent in Tehran over this until Shah Mohammad's power over Iranian politics was strengthened in a coup backed by the United States and Britain. From 1953 until 1979, Iran and Israel had a working relationship. Jewish Israel and Persian Iran were enemies of the Arab majority states in the region. Following the revolution, relations took a nosedive. The new theocratic government under Ayatollah Khomeini refused to recognize Israel as a legitimate Jewish state. Israel was seen as the Little Satan, an aggressor that had driven Muslim Palestinians from their land, and a Zionist puppet of Western imperialism in the region, one sponsored in particular by the Great Satan, the United States. Iran's ideological goal is to end Israel as it's known today and replace it with a neutral, non-religious state. Khomeini more bluntly stated that the new Iran's goal would be to wipe Israel off the pages of history. Khomeini's successor, Iran's current supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, has classified the country's government as an oppositional one to Western imperialism and Jewish Zionism. Above all, the 1979 Iranian Revolution brought a Shiite Islamist theocratic government to power in Iran. The new regime wanted to spread Islamic revolution throughout the Middle East, and this meant increasing its influence among the Arab states, which it had been opposed to during the time Shah was in power. Since these Arab states had long been enemies of Israel and fought several wars against it, opposition to the Jewish state and increased influence in the region went hand in hand. In the early to mid-1980s, the rhetoric began to turn into military reality. In 1982, as Israel intervened in Lebanon's civil war at the time, Iran responded by dispatching some of its Revolutionary Guards to Beirut to support local Shiite militias. This support gave birth to Hezbollah, and with it, the start of the Iranian proxy conflict with Israel. Iran has continued to support Hezbollah since this time. Hostility to the Jewish state of Israel is one of the ideological commitments that tie Iran to Hezbollah and its other proxies in the region. Iran's Islamist ideology, however, has limits. Some critics in the country have noted that it shares close relations with China and Russia, which have or are oppressing their respective Muslim minorities. Additionally, Iran stands in fierce opposition to some Arab states, especially Sunni-majority ones, like Saudi Arabia, which it has also had a proxy war with since the revolution. Iran's opposition to Israel should therefore be viewed as much of a geopolitical calculation as a devotion to Shiite Islamist ideology. Iran's ultimate goal for the region is to create an unbroken area for its influence, stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. This area encompasses the island kingdom of Bahrain, moves into Iran proper, and then by land through Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. All of these areas have Shiite majorities or significant minorities. Because of the shape of this area, it's known as the Shia Crescent, a term created in 2004 by King Abdullah II of Jordan, who commented on Iran's increasing influence in Iraq at the time. In the build-up to the first post-Saddam Hussein elections there, Abdullah commented about a new crescent and warned that a Shiite government influenced by Iran would be the worst-case scenario for the new Iraq. Indeed, the Sunni regime of Saddam Hussein had long been a check on Iranian influence in the region, and his overthrow in 2003's Operation Iraqi Freedom greatly assisted Iran's efforts to create its Shia Crescent. The next major development in favor of Iran came in Lebanon a few years later. There, Israel tried to crush Hezbollah in a military operation in the summer of 2006, but the group did not disarm following Israel's withdrawal, as the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701 demanded. Instead, Hezbollah got stronger, and the Lebanese government has been unwilling or unable to control its military activities near the border with Israel. The growing strength of Hezbollah gave Iran another major victory in the region. The third major step on the road to a Shia Crescent came in Syria, although this one was for a time the most doubtful. The Syrian civil war presented a major challenge to Iran's ambitions. For the first few years, the Shiite Alawite regime of Bashar al-Assad was in trouble. The rise of ISIS and its self-declared Sunni caliphate was another severe challenge to Iran's ambitions. In a demonstration of how complicated the politics in the region are, Iran, Israel, and the United States all shared interests in destroying the ISIS caliphate. Iran's Shiite proxy militias, often with Iraq's backing as well, participated in the operations against the radical Sunni terror group. With no allies, ISIS was destroyed as a territorial organization. The differences between these parties in Syria, however, were irreconcilable. Iran needed to keep Assad in power, while the United States and Israel wanted him ousted. Israel only played a limited role in the Syrian civil war, confining its attacks to Iran's proxies taking part in it. Nevertheless, Tel Aviv was adamant that Assad could not remain in power. In 2017, as the tide was turning in the Syrian regime's favor, then Israeli Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman summed up his government's position. "We cannot allow a man like Assad, who kills his own citizens and who uses chemical weapons against them, to remain in power. Keeping Assad in power is not in our security interests. As long as he is in power, Iran and Hezbollah will be in Syria." However, Assad won the war with Russia and Iran's help. Consequently, his Iranian backers have now almost realized their goal of creating the Shia Crescent in the region. This axis of resistance stretches mostly unbroken from Iran to Lebanon. Then Mossad director Yossi Cohen summed up the situation best in 2018, when he said if then Quds Force leader Qasem Soleimani wanted to, he could drive from Tehran to Lebanon's border with Israel without anything to stop him. This route is now wide open for Iran to send personnel and supplies to its proxy militias. Hezbollah was able to participate in the operation against Israel on the night of the 13th to 14th because of this open supply route and communications. The axis of resistance is why Hezbollah is so well armed. On October 7th, Hamas overwhelmed Israel's vaunted Iron Dome with a barrage of thousands of unguided rockets. At the time, experts worried that Hezbollah would join in and learn from this, as its arsenal of these projectiles was far larger than that of Hamas. Perhaps in a test for later operations, Hezbollah targeted Israel's Iron Dome for the first time in December 2023. Iran can send these projectiles to Hezbollah with high reliability thanks to the overland route from its own interior to Lebanon. The expanded area of influence was also why Iran was able to help Hamas coordinate the October 7th terrorist attack that started the current war in Gaza. At least some of the planning for that attack was done in Lebanon, with Iranian agents present. These agents could travel in far greater confidence thanks to the land routes being open. There are a few impediments to Iran's achieving the Shia Crescent, however. One such obstacle is the string of American bases in Iraq, Syria, and Jordan, which act as staging grounds to disrupt the operations of Iran and the Shiite militias allied to it. It's not a coincidence that these bases came under heavy attack by Iran's proxies between October 2023 and January 2024. Some of these bases include the Al-Tanf garrison in Syria and its support base, Tower 22 in Jordan. These bases are close to the border junction between Syria, Jordan, and Iraq, and are near the highway that spans the route from Baghdad to Damascus. About 200 special operations troops are stationed at Al-Tanf and supported from Tower 22. These bases can and have disrupted the axis of resistance. America's retaliation following the Tower 22 attack quieted the Iranian proxy's activities against its own troops for now, but operations against Israel have continued. In sum, geopolitical events in the 21st century have vastly increased Iran's influence in the region. Israel has responded by attempting to normalize its relationship with the Arab states that have previously opposed it. This process began with the Camp David Accords in 1980, when Israel and Egypt normalized their relations, and continued with the peace treaty with Jordan in 1994. The Abraham Accords of 2020 saw the United Arab Emirates, Morocco, Sudan, and most crucially for Israel, Bahrain, on the route of Iran's desired Shia Crescent, normalize their relations with the Israelis. At the time, there was much hope from both Israel and the United States that Saudi Arabia would soon join the Abraham Accords. Both are opposed to Iranian influence in the region and have fought proxy wars with Tehran. Saudi Arabia has long been the most powerful Sunni state in the region and has tried to oppose Iran's Shiite militarism. However, deeply rooted ideological opposition to Israel remained, and the hopes of normalization appeared to be dashed in March 2023 when China brokered a normalization agreement of its own between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Although this agreement could never end the long-running proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran by itself, it nevertheless made a potential normalization of relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia more difficult. Although Saudi Arabia's investment minister, Khalid al-Falih, said that such talks with Israel were still an option for Riyadh in November 2023. However, the conflict in Gaza following the October 7th attacks has strained the blossoming relations between Israel and its Arab neighbors. The government of the UAE has been facing mounting domestic criticism for its recognition as the war in Gaza goes on, and Saudi Arabia's ability to recognize Israel has likely deteriorated in the months since November. Even if Iran's proxy Hamas is destroyed in the conflict, these results are satisfactory from its point of view. On April 19th, Israel retaliated against Iran. Like the Iranian attack against Israel, the scope was limited and mostly symbolic. There were explosions near the Isfahan airbase in central Iran. Iranian air defense systems also opened up on drones that were supposedly present over several provinces, according to state television. Isfahan airbase is the home of Iran's fleet of F-14 Tomcats, which the Shah purchased from the United States before his overthrow. Iran vowed no retaliation in response to Israel's attack and downplayed the incident. For now, both sides seem to want to avoid getting into a direct conflict, but the proxy war will continue, and Israel will need to find new ways to mitigate the geopolitical disadvantages it suddenly found itself with. Aside from maintaining its own military forces, Israel has floated notions of supporting separatism within Iran. For example, it strengthened ties with Azerbaijan on Iran's northeastern border. The Azerbaijanis recognize Israel's right to exist, and there is a sizable Azerbaijani minority in Iran. These people are concentrated in the west, near the border with Azerbaijan, and compose 25 to 30% of Iran's population. Israeli sponsorship of an Azerbaijani separatist movement, perhaps in cooperation with Baku's Southern Azerbaijan National Awakening movement, could be a key element of leverage. Iran has had tense relationships with Azerbaijan over this, and in 2023, Azerbaijani and Israeli diplomats discussed forming a united front against Iran in public. Israel has another card to play. In southeastern Iran, on the border with Pakistan, Balochi separatists on both sides of the national boundary have proven troublesome. In Pakistan, they have attacked the troops guarding the infrastructure built through China's Belt and Road investments. In Iran, they represent a Sunni threat to Iran's Shiite dominance. The situation got bad enough that in January 2024, Iran launched its first strikes against targets on Pakistani soil. These targets were associated with the Balochi Sunni militant group Jaish al-Adl. Pakistan responded by recalling Iran's ambassador and striking Balochi targets on Iranian territory. According to the CIA, Israeli Mossad agents posing as Americans have met with some of these Balochi separatists in the past. Making the insurgency more serious would be within Israel's interest. From Tehran's standpoint, the operations against Israel, whether directly or indirectly, must continue. Staging these attacks is one of the best ways it aspires to leadership in the region. Backing down, especially in the face of Israeli retaliation, risks this leadership. Israel's presence south of Lebanon also ensures that Iran's Shia Crescent can never be truly secure. Israel can strike its proxies and puppets at any time, and its military remains the strongest in the region. Israel has invaded Lebanon multiple times, and there's nothing stopping it from doing so again if it saw the need to. Constantly keeping Israel guessing and on its toes, surrounded by its enemies, is key to the safety of its network of influence. Iran must also deprive Israel of resources to support any notion of separatism within its own borders. Iran will continue to support Hezbollah as its most reliable rapid response against Israel. The group has about 100,000 fighters, upwards of 150,000 rockets and missiles, drones, tanks, and artillery. This group represents a formidable threat to Israeli territory and acts as an obstacle for Israeli operations in the area against Iran's axis of resistance. On the whole, time seems to be on Iran's side. The United States' influence in the Middle East is declining, and with it, Israel's surest guarantor of security. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has diverted much of America's attention and resources. More importantly, the rise of China in the Indo-Pacific region has forced the United States to undergo a revolution in its traditional foreign policy. For the first time since the Cold War, the United States was dealing with a potential regional peer competitor. Containing Beijing's ambitions in the area that's become the center of the global economy is the most important foreign policy priority for Washington. This reality and the decline in the importance of Middle Eastern oil for the US economy means that America will consider the region as tertiary to the Indo-Pacific and after it, Europe. Biden's insistence that the United States would not participate in Israel's retaliatory operation may have been the best clue of this. Iran will take advantage of this time and attack Israel again, whether directly or through its proxies. It's a matter of if, not when. If nothing else, it will have learned about Israel's air defense capabilities in the April 2024 attack. The intelligence it's gathered will help it to plan a more effective second direct strike, should it so desire. Such a strike will likely not come in the immediate future, but few would have predicted this first strike a month ago either. For now, Iran will continue to use its proxies as it hopes to make its sheer crescent more secure, slowly but surely. What do you think Iran will do to Israel next? Is another direct attack on the horizon? Don't forget to let us know in the comments. Also, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons for more military analysis from military experts. Now go and check out how the US will start a war with Iran for attacking Israel, or click this other video instead. Imagine a highly advanced missile defense system, able to engage multiple threats simultaneously, intercepting and destroying them in midair before they can reach their intended targets. Sounds unbelievable, right? Well, it's real, and it's one of Israel's biggest assets against Hamas's relentless attacks. If you've turned on the news recently, you've probably heard mention of Israel's so-called Iron Dome. In the complex environment of modern warfare, where the threat of artillery and missiles perpetually looms over nations, the Iron Dome system has received huge amounts of attention and controversy since its inception in 2011. Known globally for its technological and strategic efficacy, the anti-missile system has helped reshape the paradigms of military defense, providing a three-dimensional shield against short-range rockets and artillery shells. Developed jointly by Rafael Advanced Defense Systems and Israel Aerospace Industries, the Iron Dome utilizes a combination of sophisticated radar technology, advanced data processing, and precise missile interception mechanisms, which work together to stop missiles headed into Israel. Yet this technology is also far from infallible, and concerns over its continued effectiveness, ethical implications, and ability to deal with massive and sophisticated attacks are all too real. Today, let's take a look at how the Iron Dome actually works, its performance, and just how well it might fare in future conflicts. To begin with, it's helpful to understand a bit of the Iron Dome's history and context. Development of the Iron Dome began as early as 2005. Brigadier General Danny Gold, then head of Mafat, Israel's Directorate of Military Research, decided to start the program for a next-generation missile interceptor. By 2007, Israel commissioned the development of Iron Dome, choosing Israeli contractor Rafael over the American giant Lockheed Martin. Another Israeli company, M-Prest Systems, was put in charge of programming the core of Iron Dome's battle management system. Iron Dome went from the drawing board to combat readiness within less than 4 years. A remarkably short period of time for a weapons system designed from scratch, and far less than had been spent on any other missile interceptor system around the world. By mid-2009, the system successfully intercepted a number of rockets, mimicking Qassam and short-range Katyusha rockets in a Defense Ministry test. Testing would continue for another 2 years before the Iron Dome was declared operational by the IDF, and Defense Minister Ehud Barak authorized deployment of the system in March 2011. In November 2012, during Operation Pillar of Defense, the Iron Dome had its first major trial by fire, mitigating the impacts of rockets launched from Gaza into Israel. The system displayed an impressive interception rate of approximately 85%, according to Israeli Defense Forces, providing tangible protective value and giving the Iron Dome its first instance of international visibility. This operation spotlighted the Iron Dome's ability to discern between threats headed towards populated areas and those bound for open fields, a crucial capability for minimizing resource usage and avoiding unnecessary interceptions. 2014 witnessed another significant chapter in the Iron Dome's operational history, during the so-called Operation Protective Edge. This 50-day conflict saw the system intercepting rockets at an unprecedented rate, as 4,594 rockets and mortars were fired at Israeli targets. Iron Dome systems intercepted 735 projectiles that it determined were threatening, achieving an intercept success rate of 90%. Only 70 rockets fired at Israel from Gaza failed to be intercepted, leading many to believe that the Iron Dome had effectively neutralized the threat of rockets. Further evolution was noted by military analysts in May 2021. During the Israel-Gaza crisis of that month, the Iron Dome was subjected to an intense barrage of rockets, encountering a scale and complexity of fire not previously seen. In the first 24 hours of conflict, 470 rockets were fired from Gaza, a much higher rate than had been attained in any previous conflicts. Of the rockets, 17% were also long-range attacks on Tel Aviv, demonstrating an elevated interception rate of nearly 90%. The system safeguarded urban locales and strategically important sites, all while underlining Israelis' technical prowess in missile defense. There had long been concern among Israeli officials that the system would struggle to deal with a truly massive barrage of rockets, a fear which has played out vividly in recent weeks. However, even so, the Iron Dome continues to represent the world's most successful and technologically advanced missile interceptor, far outperforming other similar systems. One reason for this is the Iron Dome's dispersal. Typical air defense missile batteries consist of a radar unit, missile control unit, and several launchers, which are generally all located at the same site. On the other hand, the Iron Dome is built to deploy in a scattered pattern. Each launcher, containing 20 interceptors, is independently deployed and operated remotely via a secure wireless connection. Reportedly, each Iron Dome battery is capable of protecting an urban area of approximately 58 square miles. So how exactly does the Iron Dome function? To answer this question, let's dive into the three main components of the system: the detection and tracking radar, the battle management and control (BMC) system, and the missile firing unit. First is the Iron Dome's detection and tracking radar, developed by ELTA, a subsidiary of Israel Aerospace Industries, which serves as a vigilant sentinel in the defense system. Its primary function is to continuously survey the skies, hunting for potential airborne threats like rockets, artillery, mortars, and other objects that might pose a threat to populated areas. Once a threat is detected, the radar system begins to meticulously track its trajectory, speed, and altitude. When an enemy rocket is launched, the radar system immediately detects its presence by sending out radio waves that bounce back upon hitting an object. This reflection allows the radar to determine not only the object's location, but also calculates its speed and direction by analyzing the change in the return signal's frequency, a phenomenon known as the Doppler effect. This precise tracking is paramount because, in the context of airborne threats, even minor miscalculations can result in failure to intercept, potentially leading to devastating consequences. The detection and tracking radar then promptly relays this information. The data is transmitted in real time, ensuring the immediate flow of critical information to enable swift decision-making. The radar can manage multiple threats simultaneously, tracking numerous incoming objects and providing data on each to ensure a comprehensive defensive response. This capability is vital in scenarios where adversaries launch multiple projectiles in quick succession, intending to overwhelm defense systems. Notably, the radar system incorporates electronic countermeasures (ECCM), which are designed to ensure it operates effectively even under electronic attacks, such as jamming. This robustness against electronic warfare attempts enhances its reliability, ensuring it can function even in contested electronic environments. Precision, speed, and reliability are pivotal attributes of the Iron Dome's radar system, which are vitally crucial given the short flight times of rockets fired from close ranges. This radar has to function with impeccable accuracy and speed to allow the Iron Dome system enough time to assess the threat and, if necessary, launch an interceptor missile to neutralize it before it reaches its target. The second critical element of the Iron Dome is its Battle Management and Control (BMC) system. This is the strategic and computational brain behind the Iron Dome. In the split-second intricacies of modern warfare, where projectiles travel at immense speeds, the BMC has the monumental task of processing the enormous amount of data from the detection and tracking radar, making vital decisions, and orchestrating an effective defensive response in a matter of moments. Upon receiving the critical data from the radar system, the BMC springs into a whirlwind of activity. It takes the information about the detected object, its speed, trajectory, and anticipated point of impact, and instantaneously runs it through a sophisticated algorithm. The object here is to ascertain whether the incoming projectile poses a legitimate threat to civilian areas or critical infrastructure. It's a mathematical prophecy of where the missile or rocket will land, based on its current path and other kinetic variables. If a projectile is deemed to be heading towards an uninhabited area where it will cause no harm, the BMC might choose to let it proceed unhindered, conserving resources. However, if a threat is headed toward a populated or strategic area, the BMC switches from analysis to action, deciding in a split second to intercept the incoming projectile. This capability to discriminate between threats, thereby selectively engaging only those that pose a genuine risk, is pivotal in minimizing costs and avoiding unnecessary interceptor launches. Subsequently, the BMC system communicates with the missile firing unit, providing it with data required to launch an interceptor missile with a high probability of successfully neutralizing the threat. The path of the interceptor is dynamically adjusted by the BMC, utilizing continuous data feeds about its position and the position of the incoming projectile to facilitate a successful interception. This dynamic mid-course guidance and the fine-tuning of the trajectory are crucial in ensuring that the interceptor and threat collide, even when the threat is maneuvering. Moreover, the BMC operates in unison with multiple launchers and can manage numerous threats simultaneously, orchestrating a coordinated response to multiple incoming projectiles. This is essential in scenarios of massive rocket salvos, where multiple threats in the sky need to be systematically and concurrently neutralized to protect assets on the ground. All these operations, threat analysis, decision-making, and interceptor guidance occur within an incredibly compact timeframe, exemplifying a mesmerizing fusion of advanced technology, mathematics, and strategic defense thinking. The BMC thus stands as the nerve center of the Iron Dome, effectively steering its operations. The final piece of the Iron Dome is its missile firing unit. This is essentially the muscle behind the operation, springing into action once a threat has been identified and a decision has been made to intercept. Imagine if you could launch a super-fast, highly accurate baseball to intercept and neutralize a dangerous object flying through the air. That's akin to what the missile firing unit does, but with cutting-edge technology and precise calculations. This component of the Iron Dome houses the interceptor missiles, which are designed to collide with incoming threats and neutralize them before they can reach their intended target. The actual missile used by the Iron Dome, called the Tamir Interceptor, is built to be highly maneuverable and incredibly fast, ensuring that it can meet threats head-on, even when they are moving at high speeds. Once the battle management and control system decides that a threat must be intercepted, the missile firing unit gets to work. The BMC communicates the precise data regarding the incoming projectile's path, speed, and anticipated location of impact to the missile firing unit. Armed with this information, the unit launches an interceptor missile into the sky, aimed to meet the incoming threat at a calculated collision point. The act of launching is merely the beginning of the journey for the interceptor. After being propelled into the sky, it needs to find and collide with the threat. This is where guidance from the BMC continues to play a vital role. The interceptor is consistently guided by the BMC, which adjusts its path in real time to ensure it remains on a collision course with the incoming projectile. The Tamir Interceptor is designed to destroy the incoming threat by detonating its warhead nearby, neutralizing the threat in the sky, and ensuring debris falls in areas where it's less likely to cause harm. This ability to intercept projectiles mid-air is a complex ballet of precision, speed, and technology, meant to destroy projectiles efficiently while minimizing the risk to civilian life and infrastructure on the ground. When dealing with salvos of multiple projectiles, the missile firing unit is capable of launching numerous interceptors in quick succession. maintaining a formidable defense against a barrage of incoming threats. The unit works in concert with the other components of the Iron Dome, ensuring that the identified threats are engaged and neutralized effectively. In simple terms, the missile-firing unit is the component of the Iron Dome that takes immediate, tangible action against identified airborne threats, launching, guiding, and detonating interceptor missiles to protect the skies and shield the population and infrastructure below from harm. This vital piece of the defense puzzle ensures that theory and strategy are transformed into definitive, protective action. These three components work together seamlessly, creating a protective dome in the sky. The radar spots the threat, the BMC decides on the action, and the missile-firing unit responds, all in a matter of minutes. It's a finely tuned symphony of technology, where each part plays a crucial role and must perform flawlessly to ensure the safety of the population below. When you integrate these three components, the vigilant radar, the intelligent BMC, and the defensive missile-firing unit, you get a system that is far more than the sum of its parts. Yet even with these incredibly advanced interception capabilities, one of the Iron Dome's main weaknesses is sheer volume. The system can potentially be overcome by huge volleys of missiles that exceed its capability to intercept them. Also, the cost of each interception is high, while attacking rockets can be relatively inexpensive. These are among the reasons encouraging the development of the Iron Beam energy weapon to complement the Iron Dome, which is cheap to fire, has unlimited ammunition, and is effective at short range. Iron Dome is also significantly less effective against very short-distance saturation strikes. Hamas is well aware of these vulnerabilities. In addition to having enormous numbers of rockets and using saturation strikes, the group consistently fires rockets at low trajectories to make them harder to intercept. According to Israeli journalist Ronan Bergman, in 2012 during Operation Pillar of Defense, Israel agreed to an early ceasefire. For a reason that has remained a closely guarded secret, the Iron Dome anti-missile defense system had run out of ammunition. Bergman says that as a result of the experience, Israel had tried to prepare larger stocks of interceptors for future rounds of fighting. The most recent conflict between Israel and Hamas has highlighted that a volume of projectiles to intercept is still a weakness, as the Iron Dome has been hard-pressed to stop every incoming missile. Over the first few years of the Iron Dome's deployment, the maximum number of rockets fired at Israel per day, even during periods of open conflict, ranged from roughly 200 to 300. During the May 2021 fighting, that increased substantially, with 470 rockets fired over the first 24 hours. But in 2023, somewhere between 2,200 and upwards of 3,500 rockets were launched in just the first 20 minutes. This reality made clear that despite being far superior to any other missile defense system, the Iron Dome is not impenetrable. As Patrick Sullivan and John Amble of the West Point Modern War Institute noted in a recent analysis, that quantity was simply too much for Iron Dome to manage. Hamas rocket fire is notoriously imprecise, and Iron Dome is designed not to expend ammunition on incoming rounds whose trajectories do not indicate an impact in a populated area. That is an important advantage weighing in Iron Dome's favor. If Hamas fires 10 rockets and misses with 9, Iron Dome can most likely intercept the one threatening round. If Hamas fires 100 and misses with 90, that poses more of a challenge. But given the system's demonstrated success rate, most and likely all of the threat can be thwarted. But extrapolate this dynamic by firing 1,000, 2,000, or even more rockets, and eventually the advantage shifts in favor of the attacker. This is a stark reminder that no defense, however sophisticated, is truly impenetrable. Yet even with this weakness, there is also no doubt that the Iron Dome remains head and shoulders above any other country's missile defense systems. The system's effectiveness, however, does not lie solely in its technological sophistication, but in its capacity to integrate seamlessly into Israel's wider security and defense strategy, aligning technological capabilities with strategic objectives. So as geopolitical dynamics evolve and new challenges emerge, the Iron Dome will almost certainly continue to adapt. But even with its weaknesses, the Iron Dome represents a remarkable achievement of military technology. The interplay of its principal components, the detection and tracking radar, the battle management and control system, and the missile-firing unit, orchestrates a rapid, usually precise response to incoming missiles. Each component plays a pivotal role, from initial detection and threat assessment to the actual interception, The evolution and deployment of the Iron Dome underscore Israel's broader strategic imperative to safeguard the lives of its citizens. For more than a decade, it has also given Israel the psychological and logistical upper hand in its clashes with Hamas. While the most recent conflict has put this into question for some, there is little doubt that the Iron Dome has altered the paradigm of modern military defense strategies, contributing to the doctrine of using technological might to proactively defend against short-range missiles. But what do you think? In the rapidly evolving world of geopolitics, how much of a role will the Iron Dome and similar systems play in the years to come? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more military content and analysis. Israel's Iron Dome defense has literally been the difference between life and death in their war against Hamas. However, an even more advanced defensive network is waiting in the wings. While the Iron Dome has demonstrated its effectiveness on numerous occasions, that heralded system might take a back seat to the high-tech power that is the Iron Beam. Also known as Light Shield, the Iron Beam is a laser-based air defense network that can obliterate short-range rockets, mortar bombs, and artillery. Not only that, but it can also fend off unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, a tactic Hamas has been relying on more than ever. And the price of each laser fired is negligible. According to many estimates, it only costs Israel $2,000 per shot to utilize this technology. Given the potency and economical design of this emerging warfare wonder, it's easy to see why many consider it superior to the iconic Iron Dome. Some go so far as to say that it will completely replace the Iron Dome. But can the Iron Beam deliver on its promise? To answer this, we need to compare the technologies side by side. Let's start with the older of the two, the Iron Dome. Released in 2011, the Iron Dome has been a staple of Israel's defense tactic for more than a decade now. It's a sophisticated system of detectors and rocket launchers that intercept enemy missiles. The technology is made up of three elements. The first element is the radar. When a hostile launches a missile at Israel, up to 43 miles away, the Iron Dome identifies it and gathers data on the projectile's trajectory. The second element is a computer. The computer receives the information from the radar and calculates where the missile is going. Figuring out the destination of a ballistic missile is relatively easy since it's fairly predictable. That's because ballistic rockets generally fly on an arc. If you can identify the arc, you'll get a pretty accurate idea of where the missile is supposed to strike. That's exactly what the Iron Dome computer does. The third element is the launcher. If the computer determines that the missile will hit a strategic or populated area, it sends Tamir interceptors to collide with the projectile mid-air. If the missile can't be intercepted, the Iron Dome allows it to reach the designated location to save interceptors for future use. The ability of the Iron Dome to protect civilians and military strongholds is being put to the test as we speak. Ever since the beginning of the most recent assault by Hamas, they have launched thousands of rockets that targeted heavily populated areas. Thanks to the Iron Dome, the vast majority of them failed to reach their destination. But this isn't the first time the Iron Dome demonstrated the might of the Israel Defense Forces, IDF. It's protected the nation from projectiles throughout the 21st century. However, that's just scratching the surface of the Iron Dome's influence, history, and technological prowess. It might tell us if the Iron Beam is an addition to their arsenal or a full-blown replacement. The first instance of the Iron Dome being used in combat can be tracked down to March 2012. It was at this time that Gaza terrorists launched a major missile offensive on southern Israel, discharging approximately 200 projectiles in under 3 days. Hamas operatives thought they had caught the IDF off guard, but the Iron Dome proved them wrong. The system calculated that most of the rockets were headed toward unpopulated areas, which would result in no casualties. However, the Iron Dome intercepted more than 50 rockets that targeted Ashkelon, Ashdod, and Beersheva. If not for the Iron Dome intervention, there's no telling how many innocent lives would have been lost. It didn't take long for the Iron Dome to react once again. In November of the same year, Hamas launched another airstrike that included over 1,500 projectiles aimed at Israel. The Iron Dome intercepted about 400 of them. The vast majority of the remaining rockets were deemed harmless. The defense was executed hand-in-hand with the IDF's Operation Pillar of Defense, which aimed to lower the number of missiles Hamas could use to besiege Israel. 2 years later, the Iron Dome was under immense pressure yet again. This time it was Tel Aviv and Jaffa that the system had to safeguard against Hamas rockets. At the start of Operation Protective Edge, Hamas targeted numerous densely populated regions of both Tel Aviv and Jaffa. Fortunately for the Israelis, the missiles proved no match for the Iron Dome, which intercepted around 700 rockets. The defense paved the way for a resounding IDF victory, resulting in 32 Hamas tunnels destroyed and hundreds of terrorists vanquished. The history of Iron Dome intervention doesn't end there. In May 2019, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad (PIJ) and Hamas teamed up to send nearly 700 projectiles toward Israel. Most ended up in open areas, resulting in no casualties. However, the Iron Dome also saved the lives of countless civilians by bringing down 240 missiles. The longer the conflict between Israel and Palestine goes on, the greater the intensity of Hamas's rocket attacks. This was on full display in 2021, when Hamas and the PIJ aimed to strike a decisive blow to the IDF by firing 4,350 projectiles at Israel. The number would be overwhelming for practically any other defense system, but not for the Iron Dome. Even though the intensity and number of missiles had been unprecedented, the Iron Dome didn't disappoint. It intercepted nearly 1,500 incoming projectiles that were headed toward populated and strategic military areas. The pressure from Hamas mounted when terrorists started launching missiles from various directions, but the Iron Dome proved to be an insurmountable obstacle. Over the course of this defense operation, the dome had a 90% success rate. However, this didn't discourage Hamas from launching additional assaults. The IDF knew it would need to upgrade its defense system even further and position the Iron Dome on multiple fronts. And so it did. In 2022, Israel announced that Sea Dome, the ship-mounted version of the Iron Dome, would soon enter the marine battlefield. The system passed several tests that showcased its ability to repel different threats that could emerge from the sea. In June of 2023, the IDF conducted another series of tests that proved Sea Dome's effectiveness at intercepting drones, cruise missiles, and rockets. Israel has already developed several Sea Domes on its SAR 6-class corvettes, small warships, to protect the country's shipping lanes, coastline, and natural gas rigs. By blocking the foe's projectiles from destroying their targets, Sea Dome should help ensure Israel's maritime superiority in the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea. Over the years, the Iron Dome has received numerous expensive updates to keep the forces of Hamas at bay. Israel's leading defense technology company, Rafael Advanced Defense Systems, invested billions to develop and keep the system efficient. The US also pitched in with approximately $3 billion allocated for interceptors, launchers, general maintenance, and many other aspects of keeping the Iron Dome in great shape. More financial aid from the US is in the offing. Specifically, President Biden recently announced that America would provide additional military assistance to support the Iron Dome. He's not the only one behind this initiative. Several members of the US Congress proposed a bill that would send Israel another $2 billion to reinforce the Iron Dome. With all this funding going to the Iron Dome, one can't help but wonder, what if there was a better, cheaper way for Israel to defend itself? This brings us to the other side of today's debate, the Iron Beam. If you think that laser weapons from Star Wars are improbable, the Iron Beam will prove you wrong. The system fires laser beams to topple airborne targets. Like the Iron Dome, it features a surveillance network that detects enemy projectiles before engaging them. As soon as the Iron Beam identifies a threat, it sends a laser that travels at the speed of light and reaches the missile before it reaches its destination. The IDF and Rafael didn't randomly decide to pursue such technology. The development started as a result of increasingly dangerous assaults by Hamas, who diversified their arsenal. They recently relied on UAVs and mini-UAVs, besides rockets and mortars, to threaten the Israeli military and general population. The Iron Dome proved instrumental in vanquishing these dangers, but it's also expensive. Each interceptor fired costs between $40,000 and $50,000. This might not sound like much if the Iron Dome fires just 2 or 3 missiles, but that's not the threat it faces in the war against Hamas. As previously noted, Hamas often engages Israel with multiple projectiles from different locations. Fired in quick succession, they force the Iron Dome to release hundreds or even thousands of interceptors at the same time. Not even the most powerful militaries can afford such costs in the long term. Rescue comes in the form of the Iron Beam. Using this system, the IDF can shoot down Hamas missiles for a fraction of the price of the Iron Dome. Each laser costs the Israeli military only about $2,000, including the price of technology development. allowing them to launch 20 to 25 lasers at the cost of one Iron Dome interceptor. If that's not a viable and affordable long-term defense strategy, we don't know what is. Another reason the IDF may replace the Iron Dome with the Iron Beam is to improve the efficacy of its defense tactics. The Iron Dome is highly effective, with a consistent 90% success rate across different operations. The extra 10% might not sound much, but even a single missile that bypasses the interceptors can wreak havoc on Israel and result in lives lost. The main reason the Iron Dome isn't 100% effective is that it's designed for small strikes. If Hamas launches thousands of rockets in a short window, the Iron Dome doesn't have the capacity to prevent each projectile from hitting its target. The Iron Beam, on the other hand, might just be the ace up the sleeve the IDF has been looking for. This technology features a power output of approximately 100 kilowatts. This gives the Iron Beam enough velocity to reach the rocket before it makes contact with the target. Since the technology is so fast, it can pick apart numerous projectiles in just a few seconds. What about the magazine requirements of the Iron Beam? This is yet another aspect where the Iron Beam excels. Given the laser-based design of the technology, there's no need to reload the weaponry. The fiber laser generator constantly fuels the Iron Beam, meaning it can never run out of ammunition, as long as the generator is operational, of course. The same cannot be said for the Iron Dome. Although advanced, it still features a traditional magazine design that requires consistent manual reloading. Hamas troops can seize that break-in activity to bomb defenseless cities. This won't happen on Iron Beam's watch. What's also impressive about the Iron Beam is that it reduces the debris caused by intercepting enemy missiles. Traditional rocket defense systems tend to result in lots of debris, and it's easy to see why. Just picture two rockets slamming into each other at dizzying speeds. The energy released during the process is almost unfathomable, so imagine what this energy does to the two missiles. It scatters them into thousands of pieces, all of which turn into mini projectiles. They can't harm buildings and other structures, but rogue shrapnel can prove lethal to civilians trying to hide from the commotion. The Iron Beam is a real game changer in this respect. Rather than sending up a rocket to collide with another missile, it ejects a mighty laser beam that virtually obliterates the opponent's projectile. This lowers the debris caused by the blast and makes the area underneath the explosion a lot safer. The Iron Beam sure sounds formidable, but is it safe to use? No weapon is 100% safe, but the Iron Beam is much safer than some of its traditional rocket defense counterparts. By now, you already know the weapon uses laser technology. However, it doesn't use just any laser. The Iron Beam runs on so-called solid-state lasers, which focus beams using lasing mediums. This lasing medium is a type of solid crystalline substance that's much safer to operate than liquid or gas weapons, because the IDF doesn't have to use hazardous chemicals to operate the Iron Beam. Solid-state lasers have always been safer than gas and liquid solutions, but up until recently, they weren't strong enough for military applications. The spearheads of solid-state laser technology came up with several breakthroughs in the 21st century to address this concern. Nowadays, these lasers can consistently engage and deal with targets, which is exactly what the Iron Beam does. Given all the incredible features of the Iron Beam, one might say that it will undoubtedly replace the Iron Dome. Still, the technology isn't perfect. You need to consider the downsides of the Iron Beam to figure out whether it'll take Iron Dome's position. The first of which is the relatively low-power design of this defense mechanism. Yes, you heard that correctly, the Iron Beam isn't as powerful as some other man-made weapons. For instance, you can now find 300 kilowatt weapons that can annihilate even the most robust rockets or knock them off course. But the industry has even more powerful weapons. There are also 1,000 kilowatt lasers that can easily engage hypersonic or ballistic missiles, allowing militaries to use them to devise the most effective defense strategy. In fact, these projectiles are so powerful that they can burn through the fuselage. Don't get us wrong, the IDF's Iron Beam is potent, but it can't compete with the destructive power of big guns. For this reason, it's not appropriate for all defense duties, such as taking down large drones and missiles. It's more suitable for standard mortars and rockets. Now you might be thinking, the Iron Beam is a laser weapon. Don't lasers evaporate anything they hit, regardless of their power? Lasers destroy their targets through heat transfer. The heat of a laser passes onto the object, making it burn. The speed at which the target burns depends on the laser's strength. In this case, the Iron Beam's 100 kilowatts aren't enough to vaporize massive targets. In 2020, various tests proved this by observing how long it took for certain weapons to wipe out small airborne drones. The testing featured a slightly stronger weapon, 150 kilowatts, than the iron beam. Even so, it took the weapon about 15 seconds to vanquish the target. Since the iron beam isn't as powerful, it would take even longer to obliterate large drones and missiles, giving some projectiles plenty of time to reach the ground and potentially cause massive damage. Next, you need to consider atmospheric scattering, which is essential when discussing any laser weapon, not just the iron beam. Atmospheric scattering refers to the disturbance created by sand, water vapor, salt, air pollution, smoke, and many other impurities, all of which make the laser less effective at long ranges. So far, the iron beam hasn't overcome this hurdle. It can destroy targets up to 4.3 miles away. Anything longer than that, and the iron beam will likely fail to disable the projectile before it hits its target. That's not to say the iron beam and other lasers can't be used at longer ranges. For instance, the IDF can utilize the technology beyond 4.3 miles to dazzle, blind, or otherwise distract the optical sensor of a satellite, weapon, or airplane. Once this happens, the target of the laser may no longer be able to receive data that guides it to its intended destination, rendering it virtually useless. But if total destruction of a rocket or mortar is the only mission, 4.3 miles remains the threshold beyond which the iron beam cannot achieve success consistently. Another drawback of the iron beam is that it's susceptible to thermal blooming. If the weapon fires in the same direction for a few hours or even minutes, it raises the temperature of the surrounding air. Ultimately, the heat can cause the laser to defocus and make it vulnerable to hostile projectiles. Now, thermal blooming isn't a major factor if the iron beam engages its target at a particular angle, but when there's a heat-resistant missile that's headed straight at iron beam, the lack of focus puts the weapon at a greater disadvantage reaching its destination. The good news for IDF is that mortars and rockets used by Hamas don't have extraordinary heat resilience, but this doesn't make the iron beam immune to more advanced rockets. Thermal blooming, atmospheric scattering, and some other shortcomings elevate the need for impeccable beam control. The laser also needs to have a clear line of sight with the target to be effective. This brings us to yet another flaw of the iron beam. It's hard to use. Many more years of testing are required to polish the technology and make it more user-friendly. The IDF, Rafael, and other spearheads will also need to work around the weapon's limited effectiveness at long ranges. Therefore, it's safe to say that the iron beam won't replace the Iron Dome, at least for now. Israel has accelerated the development and research behind the technology due to the ongoing conflict with Hamas, but even the most optimistic forecasts say the iron beam won't be deployed before 2024 or 2025. Although the Israelis have expedited the development of the iron beam, it's only natural to think that, considering the urgency of the ongoing crisis, they would have already approved it for warfare use. That hasn't been the case for several reasons. The primary challenge is technological. More specifically, the developers struggled for many years to generate a 100 kilowatt beam that could quickly destroy its targets. They saw that it was hard to concentrate this much power into a single beam and maintain its velocity. But they came up with a brilliant solution to divide the laser into multiple beams. This ensured enough power and speed, giving them the best of both worlds. However, splitting the beam into several smaller beams is no easy feat. The scientists had to fine-tune the timing of each beam, so it would work in unison with the other beams and heat enemy targets rapidly. Only recently did the IDF overcome this obstacle. Another and perhaps even more important reason is regional instability. Since 2019, there's been constant unrest in the Israel-Palestine relations. To make matters worse, Israel has had many short-term governments that prioritized different policies. All this was reflected in the military budget. The state simply didn't have enough money to speed up the iron beam production further, which is why they postponed the development. While you may have seen videos of the iron beam in action, none of them actually show the laser weapon. Some display the Iron Dome batteries intercepting inbound rockets that make the camera lens flare, which appears like a laser on screen, while others use edited footage from warfare video games. Whatever the source of those clips, one thing's for sure: as of today, the iron beam isn't being used to defend Israel from Hamas missiles. When it finally makes its appearance, it won't replace the legendary Iron Dome. Instead, it's designed to be employed side by side with the existing technology. How exactly will the two technologies work to destroy rockets, missiles, UAVs, and other aerial threats? The answer is pretty straightforward. You need to consider the design and intended purposes of the Iron Dome and the iron beam. Once the two systems operate side by side on the battlefield, the Iron Beam will primarily deal with short-range projectiles, including standard rockets and mortar bombs. It should also be heavily used for intercepting UAVs and drones. That's because these aircraft have light shells, which are typically made of heat-sensitive materials such as plastics. The minimal heat resistance makes them sitting ducks for the laser beams, since the beams can cut through them like a knife through butter. Basically, the Iron Beam can vaporize these targets in milliseconds. Another factor that will determine the roles of the Iron Beam and the Iron Dome is the distance. Since the Iron Beam is only effective at ranges up to 4.3 miles, it won't be used to intercept distant rockets, missiles, drones, and UAVs. Likewise, it's less effective in cloudy weather, because this makes it harder to maintain accuracy. The same goes for mist, haze, and other atmospheric elements, which can compromise the system drastically. With short-range, lightweight targets eliminated courtesy of the Iron Beam, the potential of Israel's enemy to inflict massive damage is drastically reduced. Nevertheless, long-range, heavy-duty missiles remain. That's where the Iron Dome comes in. As it's designed to destroy projectiles up to 43 miles away, it's much more effective than the Iron Beam at long ranges. The moment it identifies a rocket within its radius, the weapon intercepts it with a missile of its own, vanquishing it before it gets dangerously close to the ground. The short-range, long-range dynamics is where the power of the Iron Dome and Iron Beam is most evident. If the hostile launches thousands of rockets in quick succession, the Iron Dome can intercept about 90% of them, but some are bound to bypass the system. The Iron Beam supports the Iron Dome by vanquishing any projectiles that enter its 4.3-mile radius, which increases the overall efficiency of Israel's missile defense network. So, the Iron Dome will need to bear the brunt of assaults due to its effectiveness at longer ranges. But the quality of the projectiles is also important. Whenever an Iron Dome interceptor reaches the foe's rocket, it destroys it instantly. Unlike with the Iron Beam, this process doesn't span several seconds. Even if a missile has a thick metal housing, it's no match for the Iron Dome. The Iron Dome-Iron Beam duo should get things done most of the time. However, Israel wouldn't be one of the top 5 militaries in the world if it had just 2 systems in its missile defense strategy. The 2 weapons are mighty, but they won't retire other networks in the IDF's arsenal. Consider the Arrow 3, jointly developed by the Israel Missile Defense Organization and the United States Missile Defense Agency. Arrow 3 is part of the cutting-edge Arrow Weapon System, AWS, the first ever anti-tactical ballistic missile, ATBM, defense network. Arrow 3 detects, monitors, intercepts, and obliterates enemy TBMs with a variety of rockets over a massive surface, enabling the system to protect many population centers and strategic assets, using hit-to-kill technology. It launches a missile that contains a kinetic kill vehicle vertically, and whenever necessary, it changes the trajectory of the projectile toward the calculated interception point. Only upon identifying and getting close enough to a hostile warhead does Arrow 3 launch the kill vehicle. The range of the system is nearly 1,500 miles, and it can intercept weapons at heights of up to 60 miles. Another essential part of Israel's defense system is the colorfully named David's Sling. This weapon is also designed to intercept projectiles fired by Hamas or other enemy countries, including Syria and Iran. The range of David's Sling is approximately 160 miles, which is longer than the Iron Beam and the Iron Dome, but shorter than the Arrow 3. This makes the system ultra-effective at toppling mid-range projectiles, enabling it to reduce the pressure on the Iron Dome and the Iron Beam by annihilating rockets before they enter the radiuses of the 2 systems. And it might be best to end the debate on this note. The goal of the IDF when developing new defense systems isn't to replace a weapon that's already proven its effectiveness. The goal is to support the existing arsenal and create a virtually impregnable layer that not even the most intense rocket assaults can breach. That being the case, the Iron Beam will not replace the Iron Dome anytime soon. It'll mainly intercept short-range projectiles, UAVs, and drones if they make it past the Iron Dome. But at the end of the day, who knows what the future holds? Hamas may make Israel overhaul its defense strategy. If that happens, what do you think the roles of the Iron Dome and the Iron Beam will look like? Will the 2 weapons complement each other? Or will the IDF need to develop an even more advanced solution to destroy hostile rockets? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more military analysis from military experts. On February 3, 2024, the US Central Command, CENTCOM, released a statement detailing joint strikes conducted by the US and UK targeting the Houthi rebels in Yemen. The statement briefly answers three questions: when, where, and why. When? On February 3rd, around 11:30 p.m. Sana time, which is 2:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. Where? At 13 locations within the terrorist-controlled area of Yemen. And why? To respond to increased destabilizing and illegal activities in the region. However, CENTCOM's statement didn't mention anything about the how, so let us fill you in. For these airstrikes, the US deployed the Navy's most advanced carrier-based multi-role strike fighters available today, the FA-18EF Super Hornets. This fact raises another why question. Why were Super Hornets used to devastate the Houthis? Though, let's be honest, if you aren't familiar with the Red Sea crisis, the answer to the first why question, why were the Houthis targeted, won't mean much to you. So let's give you proper answers to any questions you might have about this situation. Let's start with what exactly happened on February 3rd. As mentioned, multilateral coalition strikes were launched against the Houthis, who had been redesignated as terrorists by the US Department of State on January 17th. These strikes were primarily conducted by CENTCOM forces and the British Armed Forces, with support from Australia, Bahrain, Canada, Denmark, the Netherlands, and New Zealand. The strikes hit 36 targets across 13 locations in Houthi-controlled Yemen, including underground storage facilities, command and control centers, unmanned aerial vehicle (UAV) storage and operation sites, missile systems, radar installations, and helicopters. But why these targets? Because they were used either directly or indirectly to attack international merchant vessels, the Royal Navy and the US Navy ships in the Red Sea, Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and the Gulf of Aden. Based on the targets involved in these strikes, it's easy to conclude that the US and UK intended to degrade Houthi capabilities to continue their unlawful attacks on vessels in the region. If you're well versed in US military equipment, the list of targets will also tell you why the Super Hornets were used. If not, don't worry, we're about to break it down for you. When it comes to the equipment used for the strikes, one location is of particular importance: the underground storage facilities. The February 3rd statement by CENTCOM is the first time these facilities were included in the target list. The nature of these locations likely has something to do with the choice of fighter jets used to strike them. You see, the Super Hornets can release GBU-24 Paveway 3 bombs that offer unique functionality. Namely, these 2,000-pound laser-guided bombs can penetrate hardened structures before exploding, making them ideal for striking underground facilities like bunkers and command centers. The GBU-24 bombs are precise enough to fly down ventilation shafts into hardened targets, but they do need to be controlled by the aircrew until impact. This makes them different from the Joint Direct Attack Munition (JDAM) weapons deployed in the region, as these use GPS-guided bombs. Besides the underground facilities, another target on the list was taken out by the Super Hornets, the Houthi radar installations. However, this time, the US used a specialized variant of the two-seated Super Hornets, the EA-18G Growler. The Growler is a carrier-based electronic warfare aircraft that can carry extensive radar jamming equipment, as well as the AGM-88 HARMS. To understand the purpose of these missiles, all you need to know is what HARMS stands for, which is High-Speed Anti-Radiation Missile. In other words, AGM-88 HARMS home in on surface-to-air radar systems and neutralize them. These two uses alone should tell you how versatile the Super Hornets are. They also warrant a closer look at the Boeing FA-18EF Super Hornet weapon series. The Super Hornet is the Navy's primary strike and air superiority aircraft. It's an updated version of the original Hornet, the McDonnell Douglas FA-18 Hornet. So what makes this new Hornet iteration super? The short answer is enhancements in size, range, and capabilities. But if you're looking for more details, let's look at some numbers. The Super Hornet features a roughly 20% larger airframe than the original Hornet. This airframe is also 7,000 pounds heavier when empty and can carry 15,000 pounds more than the FA-18 Hornet. The same applies to the internal fuel department, as the Super Hornet can carry 33% more internal fuel. The result? This highly advanced aircraft has a 41% longer mission range and 50% higher endurance. Talk about impressive. Of course, the significantly larger weight means that the catapult and arresting system must be set differently. Interestingly, the Super Hornet was supposed to be even heavier by as many as 400 pounds. However, Boeing managed to keep its weight lower while still meeting all the necessary performance requirements. Speaking of performance, the Super Hornet can perform virtually any mission in the tactical spectrum. In this video, you've already heard how it performs in two of these mission types: night strikes with precision-guided weapons and the suppression of enemy air defenses. However, the combat-proven Super Hornet can also be sent on a number of missions like day strikes with precision-guided weapons, fighter escort, close and deep air support, maritime strike, forward air control, tanker missions, reconnaissance, and others. Impressive, right? Well, we're just getting started. During these missions, the Super Hornet can also be armed with a wide range of munitions, in addition to the Paveway laser-guided bombs and AGM-88 HARMs we mentioned. In the intense strikes in Yemen, the Super Hornet showcased its versatility and power. It wasn't just equipped with the standard loadout, this fighter jet was armed for a diverse range of threats. For taking down Houthi drones, it carried the agile AIM-9 Sidewinder short-range air-to-air missiles, and to counter enemy ship missiles, it deployed the AIM-120 AMRAAM, capable of beyond visual range strikes. But the Super Hornet's arsenal doesn't end there. It's a true multi-role fighter, armed to the teeth with an array of weapons for any scenario. Its M61A1-A2 Gatling gun systems offer rapid-fire precision. The AIM-9X Sidewinder and AIM-7 Sparrow missiles bring a triple threat capability and medium-range radar homing respectively. It's equipped with Harpoon missiles for all-weather anti-ship warfare and SLAMs and SLAMers for standoff land attacks. The Maverick guided missiles, joint standoff weapons, and joint direct attack munition kits further expand its capacity for precision and power. This extensive and varied armament truly puts the in multi-role fighter, making the Super Hornet a formidable force in any combat scenario. However, the Super Hornet is not just a formidable combat aircraft. Its versatility extends to playing a crucial logistical role in the skies. With its Advanced Aerial Refueling System, ARS, the Super Hornet seamlessly transitions into a tactical airborne tanker. This adaptability is a game-changer for the Navy, especially considering the vacuum left by the retirement of the KA-6D Intruder and Lockheed S-3B Viking tanker aircraft. But just how does the Super Hornet fare in this newfound role? When it comes to fuel capacity, it's on par with the revered KA-6D Intruder. This comparison not only highlights the Super Hornet's multifaceted capabilities, but also prompts us to delve deeper. Here's another fun fact you may not have known about. The Super Hornet's ARS includes an external 330-gallon tank with a hose reel and 4 additional 480-gallon tanks for a total of 29,000 pounds of fuel on the aircraft. Besides an impressive fuel capacity, the Super Hornet boasts the ability to return to the aircraft carrier with a larger load of unspent fuel than the original Hornet. But as impressive as the Super Hornet is, this aircraft wasn't the only equipment used during the February 3rd strikes. According to some reports, the Tomahawk land attack missiles, TLAMs, were likely used to target UAV storage and operation sites, as well as helicopters parked outside. This brings us back to the why question from the beginning of the video. Why did the US and the UK strike terrorist-controlled Yemen with such ferocity? Well, these strikes were a direct response to a barrage of Houthi attacks into the Red Sea, which the CENTCOM labeled as one-way UAVs. Of course, the Super Hornets were also used to shoot down these drones, all deployed from the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower aircraft carrier. But here's another why question for you. Why is protecting the Red Sea of such high importance? Perhaps President Joe Biden can chime in with an answer to this question, as he called this sea one of the world's most vital waterways. And that's precisely what the Red Sea is. This crucial maritime choke point connects the Mediterranean Sea to the Arabian Sea, and in turn, the Indian Ocean. With the Suez Canal, this sea provides one of the fastest and shortest ways to travel between Asia and Europe. With this in mind, it shouldn't be surprising that as much as 15% of the global trade passes through the Bab al-Mandab Strait at the southern end of the Red Sea, and in turn, the 120-mile-long Suez Canal. In 2023 alone, roughly 21,344 ships have taken this route, which comes out to about 58 vessels per day. Though the Houthis haven't primarily targeted these vessels, global shipping companies have mostly decided to reroute their vessels either way, thus avoiding the potential conflict zones and ensuring the safety and the security of their assets. Of course, these moves are bound to have disastrous global economic repercussions. After all, rerouting means that ships must go around Africa through the Cape of Good Hope, which is significantly longer, costlier, and less efficient. To understand just how less efficient this route is, all you need to know is that it adds between 3,000 and 6,000 nautical miles to the ship's journey. So let's say a ship is traveling from Shanghai, China, the world's largest container port, to Rotterdam, the Netherlands, Europe's largest container port. Typically, this voyage would cover about 10,600 nautical miles and last roughly 27 days. However, when rerouted, the ship must travel at least 13,800 miles, which adds a minimum of 7 days of transit. If there are multiple ports of call, this figure can increase to 10 to 14 days. Still, the way the companies see it, it's better to arrive at your destination later than not at all. That's why it shouldn't be surprising that the expected freight container volumes through the Red Sea region fell by as much as 78% in January 2024. But what do the Houthis gain from such a massive disruption to global trade? Or in other words, why did they even start wreaking havoc on the Red Sea region? To understand the answer to this question, you must first learn who the Houthis truly are. If you ask the US Department of State, the answer is simple: they're a specially designated global terrorist group. But if you look at the Houthi movement from their perspective, they see themselves as a political and religious faction seeking representation and autonomy for their community, the Zaidi Shia Muslim minority in Yemen. Of course, this still doesn't explain their actions in the Red Sea, but bear with us, it will all make sense soon. You see, the Houthis, or Ansar Allah, as they're officially known, are part of the Iranian-led Axis of Resistance. Beside the Houthis, the informal political and military coalition includes the Syrian government, Hezbollah, a Lebanese political party and militant group, and various Palestinian militant groups, including Hamas. Most of these groups are designated as terrorist organizations by the US, with Syria designated as a state sponsor of terrorism since 1979. Unsurprisingly, the US is exactly who this coalition sees as the enemy, together with other powerful Western nations. The same goes for the Arab countries of the Persian Gulf and Israel. Now that both Israel and Palestine are in the picture, you might see where we're going with this one. Yes, the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea started shortly after Hamas's October 7th attacks on Israel, which claimed around 1,200 lives. When Israel invaded the Gaza Strip in response to these deadly attacks, the Houthis vowed their support to Palestinians and started attacking commercial vessels they claimed were bound for Israel. The US responded by forming a multinational coalition called Operation Prosperity Guardian in December 2023, consisting of 10 known and 10 anonymously involved nations. This coalition was designated to protect commercial shipping in the Red Sea. Soon after, in February 2024, the European Union also launched a naval mission, Operation Aspides, to protect the cargo ships in the Red Sea. So far, Germany, France, Italy, and Belgium are planned to contribute ships to this mission headed to the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. But as important as Operation Prosperity Guardian is, not all US attacks have been part of this military operation. In fact, the primary strikes we're discussing today, the ones led by the Super Hornets, were conducted outside Operation Prosperity Guardian. Though the Red Sea attacks are a central part of the Red Sea crisis, this crisis is also a part of the broader proxy war between the US and Iran. After all, Iran is who presumably arms the Houthis, enabling them to target ships and cause chaos in the Red Sea. Though Iran denies these claims, it's abundantly clear that the Houthis couldn't operate at such a high level without the arms, training, and intelligence of one of the strongest armed forces in the world. That's how the Red Sea crisis has been able to become a tit-for-tat military standoff between the Iran-backed Houthi movement and the US and its allies. On their own, the Houthis would never be powerful enough to stand up to, let alone provoke, the most powerful military power in the world. With this in mind, let's go through the most significant developments in the Red Sea crisis before and after the Super Hornets got involved. In early November, the Dwight D. Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group, IKE-CSG, arrived in the Middle East amid rising regional tensions. This is also when intense Houthi attacks were taking place on the vessels in the Red Sea began. On November 19th, the Houthis landed a helicopter on the Galaxy Leader, a Bahama-flagged and British-owned carrier traveling from Turkey to India. They seized the vessel and rerouted it to the Hodeida port in Yemen. As of February 2024, the entire crew aboard this ship, 25 seafarers, is still held captive. Since the seizure of the Galaxy Leader, at least 40 ships have been attacked by the Houthis, primarily in the southern Red Sea. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait seems to be their location of choice, as they often attack vessels as soon as they enter the strait. Given the strait's relatively small dimensions, roughly 20 miles wide and 70 miles long, and strategic importance, it should be clear why it's been chosen as the primary location of the Houthi attacks. However, the Houthis didn't stop at attacking the ships. They also launched numerous ballistic missiles at Israeli military posts. Most of the initial Houthi threats were identified and neutralized by the Israeli Defense Forces (IDF). The first notable time the US IKE-CSG got involved was on December 6th, when the USS Mason shot down a drone launched from Yemen. Throughout December, the US forces continued downing a barrage of drones and missiles sent over the southern Red Sea. Toward the end of this month, the F-18 Super Hornets had their first notable engagement in the Red Sea. Launched from the USS Laboon on December 26th, these fighter aircraft destroyed 12 one-way attack drones, 2 land attack cruise missiles, and 3 anti-ship ballistic missiles fired from Houthi-controlled Yemen. This is roughly the same time that Operation Prosperity Guardian was established. However, the situation didn't get any better after December 2023. In fact, the conflict only intensified in January 2024. On January 10th, the Houthis launched a large-scale attack against some of the IKE-CSG vessels, as well as the USS Laboon and HMS Diamond, with at least 21 UAVs and missiles involved. The US responded on January 12th, bombing dozens of Houthi-linked targets in Yemen, together with the UK and other allies. It also marked the first time Houthi targets in Yemen were bombed since the beginning of the Red Sea crisis. This time, the Tomahawk missiles were used to strike 28 locations within Houthi-controlled Yemen, killing 5 Houthi fighters and injuring 6. Like the February attacks we discussed at the beginning of this video, these locations primarily included command and control centers, munitions depots, production facilities, launching systems, and air defense radar systems. All in all, over 100 precision-guided munitions of various types were used to strike these locations. Besides US Tomahawk missiles, the UK Eurofighter Typhoon multi-role combat planes had a notable role in these strikes. 4 Typhoons left the Akrotiri Air Base in Cyprus just hours before the strikes, carrying a payload of 500-pound laser-guided paveway bombs. These joint US and UK strikes continued throughout January. Most notably, 14 missiles across Houthi-controlled areas in Yemen were destroyed on January 17th, while a January 22nd attack took care of 8 Houthi targets in the vicinity of Sana'a airfield. As for maritime combat, most Houthi missiles were shot down before they could cause any damage. However, a January 30th missile got close enough to the USS Gravely that the destroyer had to employ its close-in weapon system, CIWS, to down it. It's also the first time a CIWS was used in the Red Sea theater. This brings us to February, one step closer to the 3rd day of the month, when the US unleashed the Super Hornets on the Houthis. But what preceded this day? On February 1st, the Houthis fired several anti-ship ballistic missiles on the merchant vessels in the Red Sea. Luckily, all of these missiles hit the water before causing any damage. The very next day, the Houthis launched nearly a dozen UAVs, all shot down by USS Carney and USS Laboon. Super Hornets armed with the Sidewinder short-range missiles likely took part in these counter-operations. Having had enough, the US and UK launched the February 3rd attack on dozens of Houthi locations, undoubtedly the largest scale operation in the Red Sea crisis. The Houthi spokesman, Mohammed al-Bukaiti, responded to these strikes by declaring that the group would meet escalation with escalation. Houthi media also listed the names of 17 fighters killed during these strikes, following public funerals in Yemen's capital Sana'a. However, despite the Houthi threats, most of the devastating attacks following the February 3rd strikes were launched against them, not by them. For instance, on February 24th, the US and UK conducted another joint airstrike, hitting 18 targets across 8 locations in the Houthi-controlled zones of Yemen. Again, these targets were underground weapons storage facilities, radars, helicopters, and UAV systems. With the inclusion of underground locations, you can already guess which equipment made another appearance. That's right, the Super Hornets. As for the British forces, the British Ministry of Defence said that 4 Typhoon fighter jets, supported by 2 Voyager tankers, participated in these strikes. According to the Houthi official news agency, these strikes reportedly killed a civilian and injured 8 more. If true, this would mark the first civilian casualties of the joint US and UK airstrikes against Houthi-controlled Yemen. However, in spite of the heavy losses the Houthis have suffered, they don't seem to be backing down. So let's answer two more questions pertaining to the future of the Red Sea crisis. 1. Why aren't the significantly less powerful Houthis retreating? And 2. How big of a threat are they really? Let's start with the second question. The Houthis boast an estimated 20,000 fighters and a range of fearsome ballistic missiles and drones. As explained, most of their military equipment is either supplied by Iran or at least based on the country's design. Before the Red Sea crisis, the Houthis successfully deployed these weapons against Saudi and Emirati military and infrastructure targets. The most notable weapons among them are the Shahab-3 medium-range ballistic missile, with a range of over 800 miles, the Ghadar medium-range ballistic missile, an improved Shahab-3 variant with a range of up to 1,200 miles, and several anti-ship ballistic missile models with ranges up to and above 500 miles. If you crunch these numbers, you'll see that most of Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Iraq, and Israel are within range of these missiles. This includes several US strategic facilities such as the Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, Camp Arif Jan in Kuwait, and the Naval Support Activity Naval Base in Bahrain. But even so, what makes the Houthis a massive threat isn't their military capabilities, it's their mindset. This also answers any questions about their persistence in the Red Sea crisis. You see, the Houthis have been in a state of war for over 20 years, and as far as they're concerned, this state can go on forever. As Hussam, a 24-year-old from Sana'a, told The Telegraph, the Yemeni people are prepared to take a beating for the sake of their homeland, pride, and honor. That's why it shouldn't be surprising that the US and UK strikes seemingly embolden the Houthis rather than scaring them or compelling them to stop. The way they see it, they can't lose face both domestically and internationally. The only option is to continue. For this reason, it's highly unlikely that the US will resolve the Houthi conflict through a purely military solution. Even if the country's armed forces were to invade the Houthi-controlled parts of Yemen, they would hardly accomplish anything. Why? Well, for one, there's no central command to attack and force to surrender. By their very nature, the Houthis are a decentralized group that operates in a highly adaptive manner. This mode of operation would also allow them to hide in mountains or tunnels until the threat passes, making it nearly impossible for a conventional military force to achieve a decisive victory. The same goes even if the US only sticks to targeting the Houthi military equipment. The drone systems supplied by Iran are cheap and easy to transport, so the Houthis can constantly replenish their supplies. It would take the US and its allies a lot of time and money to continue taking out each and every one of these systems. Worst of all, even though the Houthis are often seen as nothing more than an Iranian proxy, the truth is that the group is pretty self-sufficient. And while Iran and its regional allies want to avoid a major conflict with the US and its allies, the Houthis' intentions are less clear. As Bilal Saab, the director of the Defense and Security Program at the Middle East Institute, MEI, in Washington, D.C. puts it, it's going to be really hard to tame them. It's going to be really hard to rein them in. But what do you think? Do you believe the US resolve might fade over time, especially considering how much the country is needed in other theaters? Or do you think the Houthis represent too big of a threat for the US to back off? And if strikes in Houthi-controlled parts of Yemen continue, how big of a role do you see the Super Hornets having? Share your thoughts, opinions, and theories in the comments section below. Now go and check out why pirates don't stand a chance against the US Navy, or click this other video instead. Well, it's safe to say that 2023 did not end well for a small contingent of Houthi rebels operating in the Red Sea. According to representatives from US Central Command, on the morning of December 31st, 4 small vessels being operated by members of the Iranian-backed militant group were decimated by a group of US Navy SEAHAWK helicopters that had responded to the urgent distress call of a Singapore-flagged civilian shipping vessel. Armed with crew-served and small arms weapons, the Houthis approached and began firing at the 353-meter-long container ship, the Maersk Hangzhou. During the attack, the 4 small boats got dangerously close to the much larger vessel, within 20 meters, and even attempted to board it. And when it looked like the Maersk Hangzhou's onboard security team might be outmatched, the call went out to the Navy. But this wasn't the first time that Maersk Hangzhou called the Navy for help. In fact, it was the second time in less than 24 hours that they'd been attacked by Houthi forces as they were traversing the increasingly dangerous waters of the southern Red Sea. Just the day before, the ship was reportedly hit by a Houthi-fired anti-ship ballistic missile. and after the incident was reported to the Navy, the USS Gravely, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer deployed to the region earlier in the year, would end up shooting down 2 other missiles intended for the Maersk Hangzhou. Perhaps realizing they weren't going to get lucky with a long shot, the Houthis decided to move in for a closer attack, but this strategy would ultimately not work out well for them. Once that second call came in, around 6:30 a.m. local time, a small formation of Navy SEAHAWKs lifted off from the deck of the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, one of the Navy's 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers. Arriving on target a short while later, the SEAHAWKs issued a series of verbal warnings to the Houthis, who responded by opening fire on the hovering helicopters. Big mistake. In an effort to defend themselves, the helicopters swiftly sank 3 of the 4 Houthi small boats, while the remaining boat fled the area. Once the smoke cleared, so to speak, there was no reported damage to either US personnel or equipment, nor were there any casualties among the crew of the Maersk Hangzhou. The Houthis, on the other hand, lost 10 fighters in the confrontation, according to a Houthi military spokesman, who also strongly warned against any further escalation by their American enemy. To annihilate the attacking Houthis, the SEAHAWK gun crews likely relied upon a combination of their 2 primary weapon systems, the versatile and reliable 7.62mm M240 machine gun, which can be mounted in a side door or window, or the 50 caliber GAU-21, also known as the M3M. These are both formidable weapons that can provide essential offensive and defensive capabilities. The tried and tested M240 has been renowned for its accuracy and sustained firepower since the late 1970s, and its versatility allowed the SEAHAWK's crew to engage their targets with deadly precision. But in situations where increased firepower and penetration might be needed, the M3M is going to be your best bet. Whether it's used for suppressive fire or precision targeting, this heavy weapon delivers devastating firepower, making it ideal for engaging armored targets or larger threats encountered in a maritime environment. Like a handful of powerboats loaded down with rebel fighters packing AK-47s. The Navy SEAHAWK helicopter, formerly known as the Sikorsky MH-60 SEAHAWK, is a versatile and highly capable aircraft, truly the modern-day workhorse of the Navy's current arsenal of aircrafts. The SEAHAWK was adapted from the Army's UH-60 Black Hawk and the Sikorsky S-70 family of helicopters, but ended up with a few highly unique design features, including foldable main rotor blades and a hinged tail. These modifications were specifically included with naval operations in mind, so that the SEAHAWK could be used for a wide range of maritime-related missions, including anti-submarine warfare, anti-surface warfare, search and rescue, and various forms of naval logistic support. 2 of the most notable variants of the SEAHAWK are the SH-60B and the MH-60R. Similar in design and capabilities, both the SH-60B and the MH-60R are currently being used by the Navy for a variety of combat, surveillance, and support missions. The MH-60R, though, is the more widely used and more modern variant, entering into service in the early 2000s, compared to the SH-60B, which was introduced in the 1980s. The MH-60R comes equipped with advanced sensors, including an airborne low-frequency sonar system, air-launched sonobuoys, and a sophisticated APS-124 search radar system. This allows it to detect, track, and engage submarines and surface vessels with precision-guided weapons such as Hellfire missiles and Mark 54 torpedoes. Another variant, the MH-60S, is primarily used for logistic support, personnel transport, and search and rescue, or SAR, operations. It features a large cabin space capable of accommodating cargo, passengers, or medevac patients. The MH-60S can also be equipped with machine guns and other defensive systems so that it can carry out these missions in a hostile environment. In fact, all SEAHAWK variants come with a variety of defensive capabilities designed to enhance survivability in combat situations, including infrared countermeasures, chaff and flare dispensers to counter incoming missiles, and armor-plated seats to protect the crew against small arms fire. But their primary defense is their ability to operate and engage potential threats at a distance, as we saw during this recent skirmish with the Houthis. The typical crew for a SEAHAWK consists of a pilot, an airborne tactical officer or ATO, and a sensor operator. In most cases, the ATO or sensor operator is responsible for employing the helicopter's weapon systems, including its machine guns and missiles. They will typically coordinate with the pilot to engage targets effectively, but in certain situations, the pilot may also retain the ability to pull the trigger. And in terms of power, the SEAHAWK's airframe is propelled by 2 1900 SHP T700 GE 401C turboshaft engines. Manufactured by General Electric, these engines are renowned for their reliability, performance, and efficiency, making them well suited for the Navy's demanding operational tempo. The impressive power output and advanced technology of the T-700 enables the SEAHAWK to reach a maximum speed of 233 km per hour, 145 miles per hour, at an altitude of 1,500 meters, 5,000 feet. Operating with standard fuel reserves, the MH-60R typically has a range of 245 nautical miles, approximately 454 kilometers, while the SH-60B has an average range closer to 450 nautical miles, approximately 833 kilometers. What makes these aircraft truly combat effective, however, is their capability to deploy at a moment's notice. Not just from shore bases or forward operating locations, but from Navy aircraft carriers, destroyers, frigates, fast combat support ships, expeditionary transfer docks, and amphibious assault ships. They can take off from and return to essentially any vessel with a flat deck, which allows for an impressively diverse mission profile. Combined with their imposing level of firepower, it was the SEAHAWK's rapid deployment ability that's made them so effective against the mounting Houthi threat. According to CENTCOM officials, the Houthis have launched nearly 40 attacks on the international shipping industry since November 19, 2023. But since the recent string of attacks in the Red Sea began, this was the first time a US asset had actually killed any Houthi combatants. Since Hamas attacked Israel last October and Israel promptly invaded the Gaza Strip, the Houthis have continued to use anti-ship missiles and drones to attack vessels they believe are either linked to Israel or heading to Israeli ports. And as a consequence, a number of shipping companies have diverted their vessels around this area of the Red Sea, which has resulted in daunting delays and other global supply chain issues. For example, just 2 days after the Houthis' disastrous face-off with the SEAHAWKs, the Danish shipping and logistics company Maersk, the operator of the Maersk Hangzhou, announced a 48-hour pause in its Red Sea and Gulf of Aden operations. But it's not only the shipping companies who are responding to the Houthi threat. Back in December, in response to increased hostility from the Houthis and rising fears within the commercial shipping sector, the US Department of Defense launched Operation Prosperity Guardian, a security initiative that would bring together maritime forces from the United Kingdom, Bahrain, Canada, France, Italy, Netherlands, Norway, Seychelles, and Spain in an attempt to address the navigation and security challenges in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden. According to US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, the new initiative's forces will operate under the umbrella of a previously established multinational naval partnership called the Combined Maritime Forces. They will also fall under the leadership of Task Force 153, a US Navy-led initiative that's based in Bahrain and is focused on maritime security in the Red Sea. Austin first introduced Operation Prosperity Guardian during a visit to Bahrain, where he stopped during a broader trip to the Middle East that also included meetings with leaders in Kuwait, Qatar, and Israel. During those meetings, he emphasized the importance of safeguarding freedom of navigation in international waterways, given that approximately 10 to 15% of worldwide shipping passes through the Red Sea. The problem with the Houthis has resulted in billions of dollars in losses for commercial shipping companies. And since the introduction of the initiative, there's been notable progress. So far, over 20 nations have committed to participate, and more are expected to join the coalition in the future. Individual contributions to the collective effort are expected to range from military assets such as ships and aircraft, to troops, to advisory personnel, to other forms of military, financial, and logistical support. However, the commitment from allies hasn't been as reliable as the US was hoping for. Almost half of the nations who joined up have chosen to remain unnamed, while some named partners have opted to contribute only a minimal amount of personnel. The DoD remains optimistic that the coalition will grow over time. At first glance, though, the group seems to be lacking the participation of several key players, including Turkey, Germany, Egypt, South Korea, and Japan. Other nations, including Italy, India, and France, prefer to stay out from under the US initiative's umbrella and are sending ships to the region on their own. But while these individual deployments may, in the long run, contribute to Prosperity Guardian's success, they also send the message that even some of America's closest allies remain hesitant to publicly align themselves, which isn't fully unexpected given the long-burning firestorm of controversy surrounding the West's participation in Middle East affairs. Even though the overall goal of Prosperity Guardian is to boost the confidence of commercial shipping companies so that they'll feel safe returning to business as usual, the unenthusiastic response from some of the US's most powerful allies does raise some concerns for the folks in Washington. At its inception, policymakers in DC had hoped this new operation would have similar success to international counter-piracy efforts in Somalia, but that hasn't been the case. Probably because there are some clear differences in the Houthi threat, perhaps the most notable being the highly political nature behind the Houthis' motivation. The Houthis have made it perfectly clear that Israel's invasion of Gaza and the West's increased meddling is their primary driver for these attacks. And as the Biden administration continues to offer its support to Tel Aviv, many nations remain very hesitant to appear as though they're taking a definitive side in the conflict. This is particularly true of the Middle Eastern and North African states that have previously expressed support for Palestine, as well as European countries with a mostly pro-Palestinian voting population. A realistic long-term strategy is also a concern for Washington. Many are already asking, how long can the US maintain an impactful presence in the region? And if the US were to leave, wouldn't that just open the opportunity for future Houthi attacks? With new crises emerging regularly, the US resources are getting stretched further and further, which means that without a reliable, long-term international partnership, the US cannot guarantee freedom of navigation and safe transit along the Gulf of Aden and Red Sea. A recent estimate by US officials claimed that over 2,000 ships have been forced to change course to avoid the Houthi threat plaguing the Red Sea. In the past, the Houthis have used anti-ship cruise missiles, anti-ship ballistic missiles, explosive surface drones, and aerial drones to intimidate or attack both civilian and military vessels. But recently they've decided to try out another approach, an underwater attack. According to a recent report from CENTCOM, the Navy carried out a series of self-defense strikes in Houthi-controlled waters around Yemen against what they described as an unmanned underwater vessel, or UUV, as well as another uncrewed surface vessel, USV, and 3 mobile anti-ship cruise missiles. This marked the first instance of US forces encountering an underwater threat since the escalation of the Houthi attacks began. Just a few days before the UUV incident, CENTCOM issued a press release regarding the US Coast Guard's capture of an Iranian weapons shipment intended for Houthi forces in Yemen. CENTCOM hadn't yet released specific details about the Houthi UUV destroyed by the Navy, but the photographs taken by the Coast Guard showed a propeller or screw section that's consistent with UUVs used by Iran, revealing a clear point of connection between Iran and the newly emerging Houthi UUV threat. Iran has a long tradition of unconventional naval warfare, one that's continued to evolve and now includes unmanned boats, aerial drones, and underwater drones. The UUVs commonly used by Iran are similar to a torpedo or one-way attack underwater drone, OWA-AUV. These generally have a greater range than a torpedo, but are slower, which makes them more effective against static targets such as ships in port or at anchor. The UUVs typically used by Iran can also be fitted with a short mast, so it can be observed as it makes its way toward its intended target. It's also possible that Iran's UUVs can be remotely operated by a wire similar to wire-guided torpedoes, which would allow them to engage a moving target. Iran is believed to have used similar devices against tankers off the coast of the United Arab Emirates. Hamas, too, has attempted to use similar vehicles against Israel's offshore energy infrastructure. The Houthis' newfound interest in the use of UUVs could become a huge problem for the Navy and its allies, for underwater weapons are inherently harder to detect and counter than surface vessels. A UUV is more likely to remain undetected until it actually impacts its target, and because the point of impact is typically below the waterline, there's a significantly increased risk of the vessel being sunk. A warship hoping to counter an underwater attack must also rely on a very different set of tactics. One technique is using an explosive-laden surface drone, or USV, like the ones Ukrainian forces have been using against similar Russian threats. So far, though, the Navy has been highly successful in thwarting both the Houthis' surface and underwater attacks, but there's no telling how they will adapt or what other capabilities Iran might supply them with. For this will likely not be the last shipment of Iranian weapons that gets intercepted on its way to the Houthis. Nor was it the first. Since April 2015, in fact, the US military has intercepted at least 5 other shipments. Among other weapons and munitions, these shipments included thousands of AK-47s, anti-tank missiles, and even a few sniper rifles. But how do we know they came from Iran? By analyzing the recorded GPS data for each of the vessels and from information gathered from interrogating the crews, the Navy was able to determine the ships originated from Iran, likely the Bandar Abbas port, located on the southern coast along the Persian Gulf. This news didn't come as a surprise to officials from Saudi Arabia, who have long insisted that the Houthis were being supported by Iran. The intercepted shipments did, however, add credibility to those claims, but that didn't deter the Iranian Foreign Ministry from insisting that these claims were completely false. Along with the Coast Guard, the USS Gravely has also been staying busy, recently shooting down another anti-ship cruise missile launched from Houthi-controlled territory in Yemen. This attempted attack followed one that targeted the USS Carney, another Navy destroyer patrolling near the Gulf of Aden. In both cases, the ships destroyed the Houthi missiles fired at them, and they were able to avoid any damage or injuries to the crew. The Houthis have been eager to take responsibility for these recent attacks, in some cases perhaps too eager. According to US defense officials, the Houthis have even gone so far as to take credit for attacks that never happened. For example, they recently claimed to have targeted a Navy expeditionary mobile base, the USS Louis B. Puller, located in the Gulf of Aden, but the Navy says there was no such attack. Alongside Hamas and Hezbollah, the Houthis have declared themselves to be part of the Iranian-led so-called Axis of Resistance, or the unofficial league of extremist groups who've aligned themselves against Israel, the US, and the West more generally. According to experts, though, the Houthis' true motivations and political ideologies remain somewhat vague and contradictory. Originally, Houthi insurgents set out to imitate Hezbollah. They wanted to have power over the region without actually ruling. But the Houthis have always been on the outside, a militia group that's now only started to dabble in politics, and as a result, their Hezbollah-like denunciation of both the US and Israel often appears to be mostly for show. Despite their jihadist rhetoric, it's possible that they're simply another extremist faction looking to capitalize on the spoils of corruption. Originally known as the Ansar Allah, or Partisans of God, the Houthis later adopted the name of the movement's late founder, Hussein Badruddin al-Houthi. Emerging in northern Yemen in the 1990s, largely as a reaction to the rising Saudi influence in the region, the Houthis are a Shia Muslim political religious faction that, at the moment, controls a large portion of northern Yemen, including much of the Red Sea coastline, where they run a de facto government that collects taxes and prints its own money. Since 2004, they have been actively fighting against Yemen's Sunni-majority government, and it's no coincidence that around this same time, Yemeni President Ali Abdullah Saleh began calling for the arrest of hundreds of Houthis and even offered a reward for the capture of the group's founder. Tensions exploded a few months later when the older al-Houthi was killed, and his younger brother, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, stepped up to take command. Sporadic clashes between the Houthis and government forces continued for the next few years, leaving hundreds dead on both sides until a brief ceasefire was agreed upon in March 2006. Saleh even granted amnesty to some 600 previously captured Houthi fighters, but by early 2007, they again found themselves at war. The fighting would continue for another 5 months until they could reach yet another ceasefire agreement. Things remained relatively cool for nearly a year until the fighting erupted again, and after a few months, around July 2008, Saleh would be forced to relinquish the Houthi-dominated Sadr governorate to the rebels. Just over a year later, however, the Yemeni military would strike back with force, launching Operation Scorched Earth, with the intention of stamping out the Houthi rebellion in Sadr. Around this time, the Houthis crossed over the border into Saudi Arabia and began engaging with Saudi forces in a series of cross-border clashes as well. The Saudis responded by launching airstrikes against the rebels and engaging in regular ground skirmishes. Negotiations between Saleh and the Houthis went back and forth with little progress until February 2010, when Saleh's government agreed again to a ceasefire. But this may have been intended more as a form of misdirection, because early in 2010, the Yemeni military also launched Operation Blow to the Head, a crackdown on both Houthi forces and combatants from al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, or the AQAP. But the tide really began to turn in the Houthis' favor in the wake of the Arab Spring, after Saleh was ultimately ousted from the presidency. By the fall of 2014, the Houthis had taken control of most of Sana'a, Yemen's capital, and the Red Sea port of Hodeidah. And by early 2015, the Houthis had taken control of the Yemeni government, a move that was swiftly denounced by the United Nations. Saleh's successor, President Abdrabbuh Mansour Hadi, conceded to the Houthi leadership and was placed on house arrest, but soon fled the presidential palace in Sana'a, narrowly escaping to Aden. But once out of harm's way, he rescinded his resignation and declared himself the legitimate president of Yemen. He also declared the Houthi takeover a blatant coup d'etat. In 2016, the Houthis would dominate most of northern Yemen. By 2018, they were getting increasingly bold in their choice of targets, with missile attacks on Saudi Arabia becoming increasingly common and, not to mention, a July 2018 attack that damaged a Saudi oil tanker. Also in mid-2018, Yemen's now exiled president met with United Arab Emirates Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, and together they launched an offensive to reclaim the port city of Hodeidah that was ultimately unsuccessful. Savage fighting and horrendous human rights violations have torn the country apart, creating what the United Nations has called the world's worst humanitarian crisis. More than 23 million people, 80% of Yemen's population, would end up desperately needing humanitarian aid and protection. And as conditions worsened and the violence continued to escalate, US support for the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen began to waver. Several former Obama administration officials signed an open letter expressing regret for their support of the war and encouraging both sides to lay down their arms. Then, in December 2018, the US Senate passed a resolution invoking the War Powers Resolution, effectively bringing an end to US military support for the Saudi-led coalition that had been conducting airstrikes and other military operations in Yemen since 2015. The resolution to halt all logistical support and arms sales to the coalition passed the Senate with bipartisan support, making it the first time in history the Senate had voted to invoke the War Powers Resolution. Just a few months later, in February 2019, former Secretary of Defense James Mattis's resignation took effect, bringing an end to the Trump administration's commitment to finding peace in Yemen. In April, despite bipartisan support in Congress, President Donald Trump would veto the War Powers Resolution, arguing that it was both dangerous and an attempt to weaken his constitutional authority. Soon, the Trump administration would also put a freeze on $73 million of humanitarian aid for Yemen. A decision that drew heavy criticism from humanitarian organizations and lawmakers who argued that cutting aid would only worsen a situation that was already terrible. And after the US took a big step back, it didn't take long for the UAE to follow, announcing in July 2019 that it had completed its troop drawdown in Yemen. Recognizing an opportunity to advance their own interests, however, another Yemeni political military organization known as the Southern Transitional Council, or STC, moved quickly to assume control of the highly important cities in the south, including Aden, Abyan, and Shabwa. Since its inception in 2017, the STC has strongly advocated for the secession of southern Yemen and its restoration as an independent state, as it was before South Yemen and North Yemen were unified in 1990. Prior to the merger, North and South Yemen existed as two separate entities, and when they were joined, the intention was to create a single, sovereign state known as the Republic of Yemen, with Aden as its capital. But conflicts between the two regions, fueled by political, economic, and social differences, immediately broke out, eventually erupting into a civil war in 1994 when the South rallied and tried to secede. And when the STC made its move around the end of August, the UAE jumped back into the mix, this time launching a series of air raids against Yemeni government forces who were en route to Aden, hoping to take control back from the STC. But wait, you're probably thinking, wasn't the UAE just fighting with the government against the Houthis to reclaim Hodeidah? They were, but it appears the UAE lost faith in President Hadi and Yemen's weakened central government. The dynamics and power struggles within Yemen are highly complex, but for the most part, they are based on the desire for control and national security amidst a series of violent conflicts. The UAE's support for the STC has probably been rooted in a combination of strategic, security, and geopolitical goals, with the overall aim of advancing its interests in Yemen and the broader Middle East region. And in terms of the Houthis, it's probably safe to say that the UAE thinks the STC will do a better job of countering that threat. Despite the drawdown of foreign troops and continually shifting alliances, the Houthis continue their campaign, launching Operation Victory from God against Saudi-led forces in the region. They also escalated their attacks on Saudi oil installations, including the use of drones to bomb oil processing facilities in Abqaiq and Quraysh in eastern Saudi Arabia. As a result of these attacks, Saudi Arabia loses nearly half of its oil output capacity. But while the Houthis are happy to take credit for the aggression, the international community blames Iran, because they're the ones who must have provided the technical expertise needed to carry out such attacks. At the start of 2021, the Trump administration designated the Houthis a foreign terrorist organization, FTO, but as soon as President Biden took over, he revoked the FTO designation. Biden also officially put a stop to Washington's support of the Saudi-led coalition's offensive operations in Yemen, but he would continue to support the UN-led peace process, and also offered his assurances to Saudi Arabia regarding the defense of its territory. The fighting continues, with regular Houthi missiles and drone attacks against Saudi oil facilities, airports, and air bases. While the Saudis retaliate with airstrikes of their own, the US continues to condemn Houthi actions. but opts to remove its most advanced missile defense systems from Saudi Arabia. Then the UN announces that nearly 20 million people, or 2/3 of Yemen's population, are dependent on humanitarian aid for daily needs, 5 million of whom are on the brink of death due to famine or related disease. But due to dwindling international funding, the World Food Programme cuts food aid to Yemen, which leads to a dramatic increase in the cost of food. But as bad as things are now, the situation in Yemen was incredibly dire long before the Houthis stepped up to support Hamas at the start of Israel's invasion of Gaza. Almost immediately after the war started, the Houthis began attacking Israel with missiles and drone strikes, but the majority of these were intercepted. As we've seen, the Houthis have mostly been making an impact out on the Red Sea, as they've increasingly targeted ships which are Israeli-owned, flagged, or operated, or are heading to Israeli ports. Shortly after these first attacks, the UN Security Council issued a stern warning to Houthis on behalf of 44 countries around the world. In this joint statement, the UN demanded the Houthis stop attacking civilian ships and immediately release any detained vessels or crews, or else. They did not comply, and despite the ongoing efforts of the Navy, as well as many other nations' militaries, this did not seem to be enough to deter the increasingly bold, almost daily attacks occurring in the Red Sea. Yemeni officials continue to insist that Iran, as well as its proxy Hezbollah, have provided arms, training, and financial support to the Houthis. But both Iranian and Hezbollah officials have denied or downplayed these claims. And so the back and forth continues, with Iran claiming their support of the Houthis is solely political, while the US continues to accuse Tehran of enabling them to terrorize civilian operations in the Red Sea. In a recent analysis conducted by the US Defense Intelligence Agency, for example, it was confirmed that the Houthi forces had been using Iranian-made missiles and UAVs in their attacks. As far back as 2014, the analysis revealed Iran's Quds Force, a branch of its Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps that specializes in unconventional warfare and military intelligence, had been providing the Houthis with an arsenal of sophisticated weapons and training. With Iran's support, the so-called 3Hs, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, have been able to create a serious amount of chaos, and there's genuine concern among the international community that a full-scale war might break out between some combination of the US, Yemen, Iran, and Israel. If Iran were to directly attack Israel or some American asset in retaliation to the Navy's continued attacks on the Houthis, or if the US were to ramp up their support of the Yemeni government, that might just be enough to spark the next major conflict in the Middle East. So far, the isolated attacks and skirmishes we've seen haven't been enough to warrant direct military action from Iran, and Iran's leaders have been taking a more pragmatic approach. Even if they don't approve of Israel's invasion of Gaza, it seems they'd rather avoid a war that would likely involve the US, a war they would likely not win. Even before the arrival of the Houthis, from the Persian Gulf to the Red Sea to the Mediterranean, tensions in this region had been smoldering for decades. The conflict between Palestine and Israel is one of the world's longest-running disputes. But it wasn't until the emergence of Hamas, as well as the other two H's, that the stage will be set for nearly 15 years of violent conflicts on the scale we're seeing today. Ever since the first major conflict erupted between Israel and Hamas in 2008, the Gaza Strip has experienced ongoing destruction and horrendous civilian casualties. But on October 7th, a whole new chapter of this war opened up. Many experts believe Hamas's sudden escalation of violence was intended to derail the potential peace agreement that was being brokered by the US between Saudi Arabia and Israel. As part of this agreement, Saudi Arabia intended to address Palestine's concerns in general, but the Palestinians were not directly involved in the discussions, and this did not sit well with Hamas or their supporters. After Hamas's highly coordinated and brutal attack on the State of Israel, which included various other Palestinian militant groups, including the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, or PIJ, October 7, 2023 would be called the deadliest days for Jews since the Holocaust. Around 1,400 people were killed, including IDF soldiers, families that were attacked in their homes, and attendees of an outdoor music festival. Most of the casualties were Israeli civilians, but a number of foreign nationals were also murdered in the attack, while an estimated 240 others were hauled back to the Gaza Strip as hostages. The next day, Israel officially declared itself to be at war with Hamas, prompting Prime Minister Netanyahu to warn Gazan residents that they'd better get out as soon as possible. Another day later, Israel began a full-on siege of the Gaza Strip, cutting off much of the region's supply of water, electricity, food, and fuel. Given the horrendous conditions and mounting casualties in Gaza, it's clear why Hamas is going to fight this one out to the bitter end. But why, you might be asking, are the Houthis risking their hard-won gains in Yemen by getting involved in a conflict that 1. Doesn't directly involve them, and 2. Is thousands of kilometers away? Simply put, it's political. As members of the Axis of Resistance, the alliance of proxy militant groups that Iran has assembled throughout the region, the Houthis can boost their standing within the alliance by taking an active approach. For the Houthis, this means treating any Israeli-affiliated vessel traveling along the Yemeni coast as fair game for attack. Before returning to Yemen in the early 2000s and becoming more politically active, several members of the Houthi leadership received religious education in Iran. But to label the Houthis' aggression toward Israel and its allies as simply a favor to Iran would be to overlook their own wider geopolitical ambitions. The group's enthusiastic support of Hamas and Palestine more broadly might also gain them both domestic and regional support for their efforts to control Yemen. But what do you think? Can the Houthis advance their own cause by aligning themselves with Hamas and Iran? As the Israel-Hamas war continues, will they become a more serious threat in the Red Sea? Even with Iran's support, will the Houthi threat ever be a match for the US Navy assets like the MH-60 SEAHAWK? Let us know in the comments. Now go and check out how F-18 Super Hornets devastated Houthi pirates, or click this other video instead. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Everyone is terrified of Israel's Merkava tank. And here's why. The Merkava tank, which translates to chariot in Hebrew, is the main battle tank of the Israeli Defense Forces. Its development is a significant part of Israel's military history, showcasing the country's commitment to advanced technology and self-reliance in defense. The story of the Merkava begins in the early 1970s. Following the 1967 Six-Day War and the 1973 Yom Kippur War, Israel realized the importance of having a reliable and potent tank force. They had previously relied on purchased or modified tanks from other countries, but the decision was made to create a domestic tank that would suit their specific needs. The Merkava project was led by General Israel Tal, a prominent figure in the Israeli military. A veteran of World War II and Israel's wars in 1948, 67 and 73, Tal was one of the world's leading experts on armored doctrine. He had played a major role in Israel's victories in both the Six-Day and Yom Kippur Wars, by training Israeli gunners to fire from further away than either Egyptian or Syrian tanks could manage. Tal drew his inspiration for the Merkava from the lessons learned during those conflicts, envisioning a tank that prioritized crew safety, had superior armor and firepower, but could still move with agility across the diverse terrains of Israel. One of the distinguishing features of the Merkava is its overall design, with the engine placed in the front, providing an additional layer of protection for the crew compartment at the back. This goes against the traditional tank design, where the engine is at the rear. The tank's structure is heavily armored, and it includes a unique compartment at the back for infantry soldiers, ammunition, or supplies. The Merkava also boasts advanced weaponry, including a powerful 120mm main gun, a secondary 7.62mm coaxial machine gun, another machine gun mounted on the right side of the turret roof, and an internally mounted 60mm breech-loaded mortar. The roof-mounted machine gun can be remotely aimed and fired by the commander from within the turret and traverse to full 360 degrees. Since its initial introduction, the Merkava has undergone several upgrades and iterations, each improving upon the last. The Merkava Mark I, the first version, was officially introduced into the Israeli military in 1979. The Mark II followed in the 1980s with better armor and improved systems. The 1990s saw the introduction of the Merkava Mark III, which had a more powerful engine, improved armor, and advanced fire control systems. The Merkava Mark IV, introduced in the early 2000s, continued this trend of improvements, integrating even more advanced technology, better protection, and improved weaponry. In the decades since, Israel has amassed a store of over 2,220 Merkava tanks, although a substantial portion of these are still older models. The Mark IV Barak is a so-called smart tank, equipped with state-of-the-art computer systems and sensors to assist the crew in targeting and navigation. Brigadier General Baruch Matzliach, former head of the Merkava Tank Directorate, stated in 2017 that the main challenge facing armor today is the disappearing enemy, which arrives, attacks, and retreats within seconds. He told the Jerusalem Post then that man is not capable of processing all the information when it comes to the disappearing enemy. While comparing the sensors and computer in the Mark IV to the Waze navigation system for cars, he added that We understand that we need a real task computer in the tank to fuse all the information together, to present it to the tank commander so he can be able to make only the most important decisions, so he can really see and identify the target and analyze the situation in order to make the decision to shoot or not. As a smart tank, the Mark IV has fused sensors and a task computer that presents the same information to both the crew inside the tank as well as to other tanks and vehicles present in the field. The simplification and sharing of intelligence and information via C4I, command, control, communications, computers, and intelligence, has been crucial for improving accuracy and timing. The Merkava tank has been an integral part of Israel's military operations since its introduction. It's seen action in various conflicts and has proven its effectiveness on the battlefield. Its emphasis on crew protection has also set a standard in tank design, influencing other military vehicles worldwide. The tank has evolved over decades, integrating advanced technology and innovative design features to meet the challenges of modern urban and desert warfare. The Merkava's fire control system is known for its accuracy and advanced capabilities. It incorporates a range of sensors, laser rangefinders, and computer systems to calculate the optimal firing solution, ensuring high precision even while on the move. The tank's gunner and commander have advanced sights and thermal imaging, allowing for effective target acquisition and engagement under diverse conditions, including nighttime operations. The fire control system is also integrated with the tank's navigation system, providing real-time data and aiding in accuracy. The Merkava's mobility is a key aspect of its performance, designed to navigate the diverse terrains of Israel from deserts to hilly regions. It is powered by a robust V12 diesel engine, providing a good power-to-weight ratio and ensuring rapid acceleration and high top speeds. The tank's advanced suspension system aids in maneuverability, and its wide tracks provide excellent traction, even in challenging conditions. The Merkava's armor is another contributor to the tank's success, ensuring maximum protection for its crew. It features modular composite armor, allowing for quick replacement and adaptation to different threat levels. The tank's front has especially thick armor, and the engine's placement at the front adds an additional layer of protection. In addition to its physical armor, the Merkava is equipped with the Trophy Active Protection System, the only fully operational and combat-proven APS against anti-tank guided missiles in the world. The Trophy APS was developed by Israel's Rafael Advanced Defense Systems and Israel Aircraft Industries ELTA Group. Designed to detect and neutralize incoming projectiles, the Trophy system is equipped with 4 radar antennas and fire control radars to track incoming threats such as anti-tank guided missiles, ATGMs, and rocket-propelled grenades. Once a projectile is detected, the Trophy system fires a shotgun-type blast to neutralize the threat. The tank also features NBC, nuclear biological chemical protection, helping ensure the crew's safety in a variety of threat environments. When compared to other modern main battle tanks like the M1 Abrams, Leopard 2, or T-90, the Merkava holds its ground in terms of technological capabilities and protection. While it may not have the same speed as some of its counterparts, its emphasis on crew safety and its advanced fire control system make it a formidable opponent on the battlefield. The Merkava's modular armor and active protection system give it an edge in survivability, something that is paramount in Israeli military doctrine. While tanks like the M1 Abrams have mostly comparable armor and weaponry, the Merkava's unique design features and adaptations for infantry support make it more versatile. The combination of advanced fire control, robust armor, and superior protection systems has a profound impact on the Merkava's combat effectiveness. The high accuracy of its weaponry ensures that it can engage and neutralize threats at long distances, while its armor and protection systems significantly reduce the vulnerability of the tank and its crew. The tank's design prioritizing crew safety means that even if the tank is disabled in combat, the crew has a higher chance of survival, ensuring experienced and trained soldiers can continue to contribute to the defense forces. Furthermore, the integration of systems supporting infantry operations makes the Merkava a versatile asset on the battlefield, capable of fulfilling multiple roles beyond that of a traditional main battle tank. In essence, the technologies integrated into the Merkava tank have proven crucial in its operational success and effectiveness in combat, reflecting a balanced approach to firepower, protection, and mobility. This has not only established the Merkava as a key component of Israel's military might, but also as a prominent example of modern tank design focused on multidimensional warfare and crew safety. Historically, this strong emphasis on crew protection has paid dividends. The tank's front is especially well protected, featuring thick layers of armor, and the engine placed at the front, providing an additional protective barrier for the crew. This unconventional design choice ensures that even in the event of a frontal attack, the crew compartment remains shielded. To enhance its mine protection, the Merkava's floor is reinforced, and the tank employs a special suspension system designed to mitigate the impact of explosions. These features collectively make the Merkava one of the best protected tanks in the world against anti-tank missiles and mine blasts. Another important aspect of the Merkava's design is its rear compartment, which can be used to transport additional troops or carry supplies. This space, situated behind the tank's turret, can accommodate up to 6 infantry soldiers, allowing the Merkava to function as an armored personnel carrier in addition to its role as a main battle tank. This design feature greatly enhances the tank's versatility on the battlefield, providing additional support to ground forces and contributing to the tank's overall effectiveness in combat operations. The Merkava has a proven track record of surviving attacks in various combat situations, primarily due to these exceptional design and protection features. There have been numerous instances, particularly in conflicts with Hezbollah and during operations in the Gaza Strip, where Merkava tanks have survived direct hits from anti-tank missiles and IEDs, sometimes with the crew members walking away with minimal or no injuries. This has also resulted in comparatively lighter losses of both tanks and personnel. During the 1982 Israeli-Lebanese war, for instance, Israel lost dozens of tanks, but only a tiny percentage of those were Merkavas. Even during the 2006 war with Hezbollah, which fired more than 1,000 anti-tank missiles throughout the conflict, the losses of Merkavas were far more limited than older armor. In total, 5 Merkava tanks were destroyed. Of these, 2 were Merkava Mark IV. One was damaged by an IED, and the other was destroyed by a Russian AT-14 Hornet missile. The Israeli military said that it was satisfied with the Merkava Mark IV performance, and attributed most of the problems to insufficient training before the war. In total, 50 Merkava tanks, mostly Merkava IIs and IIIs, were hit, 8 of which remained immediately serviceable on the battlefield. The Merkava experienced even more success during Israel's 2014 war with Hamas, as no Merkava tanks were even damaged during the conflict. The Mark IV versions, fitted with the Trophy Active Protection System, reportedly intercepted dozens of anti-tank missiles and RPGs during the ground operation, mostly Russian-made Hornet models, proving to many that it was extraordinarily effective against man-portable anti-tank weapons. However, this is not always the case, and like any battle tank, the Merkava is not invincible. This is especially true in today's technologically advanced combat environments. As the war in Ukraine has demonstrated, small drones with explosives attached to them can be deadly to tanks. This is even true for models as well armored and advanced as the Merkava. As part of its infiltration of southern Israel on October 7th and subsequent murder and abduction of hundreds of Israelis and foreigners, Hamas fighters struck Israeli outposts along the 40-mile border wall separating Israel from the Gaza Strip. Merkava tanks have patrolled the border for decades, meant to stop just such an incursion. But this time, some of them came under attack by Hamas's grenade-dropping drones. Hamas videos depict multiple successful strikes on Merkava Mark IVs. In at least 2 cases, the tanks also burned, showing just how deadly explosive drones can be to armor unprepared for a precision strike from above. At first glance, many speculated that the drone's grenades, which weigh only a couple of pounds, penetrated the thin top armor on the Merkava's turrets. In general, that's how Ukrainian and Russian drones have been destroying each other's tanks in such large numbers. But later experts analyzed the videos of Hamas drone strikes on Merkavas. In both, it seems the drone's grenades struck either the engine compartment in the front of the tank's hull or the ammunition stowage in the bustle hanging from the back of the turret. Such strikes show the limitations of increasing tank durability. Even though the Merkava has some of the most durable top turret armor in the world, not every area of the tank can be so well protected, and a top-down strike on the front of the hull at best destroys the tank's engine and immobilizes it. A strike on the back of the turret, on the bustle, tends to ignite the ammo stored there. So as military analyst David Axe recently noted, a top-down strike on the front of the hull at best destroys the tank's engines and immobilizes it. A strike on the back of the turret, on the bustle, tends to ignite the ammo stored there, but the ensuing secondary explosion occurs outside the turret, not inside where the crew is. All that is to say, The Merkava is better protected from top-down drone attacks than other tank types are. It's not invulnerable, of course, but a drone strike on a Merkava is far more likely to immobilize the tank and spare the crew than it is to take out both the tank and the crew. Yet Israel is also clearly concerned about the possibility of a direct strike on the tank hatch. In the days since Hamas's attack, videos have emerged of Merkavas being modified with so-called cope cages, hardened protective screens, which the Russians began to adopt in 2022 to try and stop Ukrainian ATGM strikes. This again points to the role of the war in Ukraine, which has heavily influenced modern combat doctrine and technology, in what several experts have called a modern war laboratory. Numerous militaries around the world have watched and attempted to learn from different aspects of the conflict, including how to avoid the fate of Russia, which has lost upwards of 5,000 tanks. For the IDF, losing multiple Merkavas in a matter of days seems to have acted as a wake-up call. Mark Kanchian, a senior advisor with the Center for Strategic and International Studies, told The Washington Post that, "My assumption is that the Hamas attacks gave Israel the impetus to install the cages more widely. It's probably something that they had been thinking about before, since everyone is watching the war in Ukraine so closely." One major question is how effective cope cages will actually be against Hamas drone operators. Samuel Bendet, a drone expert at the Center for Naval Analyses, has pointed out that the effectiveness of extra shielding like this on a tank varies wildly, depending on the type of drone being used. They are generally more effective against quadcopters that drop small munitions, like the drones Hamas used in the attacks against Israeli forces. They are less useful against cheaply made racing drones that are more maneuverable. Such weapons have been used more and more recently to target Russia's Wagner mercenaries in Sudan. A talented pilot, Bendet said, can get around the gaps in the cages and armor, but it's still unclear whether Hamas has acquired such technology, known as first-person view or FPV drones. If it has, whether through Iran or other channels, it's likely to pose a significant challenge to Israel's armored divisions, especially in a dense urban environment like Gaza. Similarly, the protective screens would be of limited use against weapons like rocket-propelled grenades, if fired down on Israeli vehicles from high buildings within Gaza. Sonny Butterworth, a senior analyst at the defense intelligence firm Janes, noted that shields act as a buffer intended to prematurely detonate an explosive, disable warheads used on some rocket-propelled grenades, or, in the case of drone-drop grenades, cause the weapon to simply roll off the vehicle before it strikes weaker armor or fall into an open hatch. None of this solves the problem of fast-moving, pinpoint drone strikes, as any attack with sufficient accuracy will still be able to hit the least armored area of a tank. Even the much-lauded trophy system will fare, as it's likely that the tanks Hamas destroyed in its surprise attack did not have the protection system active. In sum, it's always worth remembering that due to the changing nature of modern warfare, even the best defenses in the world are not a guarantee. But while the Merkava Mark IV still has weaknesses against skilled or technologically adept anti-tank fire, so does every other modern armored vehicle. And there is little doubt that pound for pound, the Merkava remains among the most powerful and sophisticated tanks in the world, with a terrifying reputation among nations. Yet only time will tell if its array of advanced features and firepower will stand up to the challenges of asymmetric warfare in the 21st century. What do you think? Just how powerful and relevant is the Merkava on today's battlefield? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more military content and analysis.